Chapter 882. Why did Somi mention this? At that time, a serious riot had indeed broken out in Silver City. One after another, mining accidents had led to the deaths of hundreds of absentee workers. The employer was only willing to compensate the freedmen for their losses, turning a blind eye to the refugees they had hired at a low price. This infuriated the families of the victims. The refugees who were unwilling to wait for death swarmed out of the mines, burning, killing, and looting. In the end, the Night Regiment of King's City suppressed them and restored order. Her parents did not return until the siblings were sent to Old Guyland's house. Nightingale learned the cause of her parents' death from Old Guyland. But the Viscount's words did not seem to be the case. She did not expect that an accident that happened more than 10 years ago could still subvert everything. If what Roland said was true, the investigation would not only focus on the relationship between Hyde and the Somi family. Nightingale quietly left the room, passed through the floors, and came to the basement. She then activated the sigil of listening that she always carried with her. She had prepared it so that Roland could call her back at any time, but she did not expect that it would come in handy in such a way. "It's indeed very suspicious," Roland, who was on the other end of the sigil, replied after listening to the story. "So you want to stay in the mansion for a longer time?" "Yes, I want to wait until nightfall to ask Hyde personally. Maybe he knows something." Nightingale hesitated. "Sorry, Your Majesty, There's nothing to apologize for," Roland quickly interrupted her. "I'll wait for you in the camp until you finish your investigation. Don't worry, it's very safe here. As long as I don't go out, I won't violate the agreement. But you have to pay attention to your own safety. Don't be too impulsive. No matter what the situation is, report to me every 4 hours." Nightingale felt a surge of warmth in her heart. She was silent for a while and then replied softly, "Yes, I understand." Nightingale did not leave the cellar until the moonlight disappeared from the skylight. She walked toward Hyde's room. Before that, she had already confirmed her brother's location. The moon setting in the west meant that it was close to 3:00 in the morning. Most people had fallen asleep, and even the guards on night duty were dozing off. Therefore, it was the best time for her to act. Hyde's bedroom was on the first floor of the mansion, close to the backyard. Normally, only servants and less important guests would stay here. Hyde's bedroom had proved the two guards' words. Viscount did not take the heir of the Guyland family seriously. At the same time, Nightingale realized that the kindness of the Somis in her childhood might have been a pretense. However, the other party's contemptuous attitude made her feel a lot more relaxed. There was not a single person guarding the entire hall. In this way, even if something happened, she would have enough time to escape. After entering the bedroom, Nightingale straightforwardly pulled her brother out of the quilt. When he woke up from his dream, before he could completely recover, a dagger with a cold glint was already pressed against his neck. Screaming for help, crying for help, "You will die, understand?" She stood behind Hyde and whispered. The latter hurriedly nodded. "Very good. Now turn around and see who I am." Hyde did as he was told. However, when he saw the face of the newcomer in the dim moonlight, his eyes suddenly widened. If it were not for the dagger on his neck, he would have screamed out loud. However, he managed to restrain himself in the end. After making sure that Hyde had calmed down, Nightingale slowly withdrew the dagger. Why are you here?" Hyde suppressed his trembling voice and asked, "Shouldn't you be dead?" The moment she heard him speak, memories of the past suddenly surged into her mind. At that moment, Nightingale felt as if she had returned to Old Guyland's house. The pain of being betrayed by her own brother and the oppression of her distant relatives made her feel so much pain that she wanted to die. Even her consciousness became a little dazed. It was this person in front of her who had personally torn apart her most vulnerable side and exposed it in front of an insecure outsider. "Why do you say that?" She bit her tongue to dispel the distracting thoughts in her mind. Because. Hyde swallowed his saliva. Timothy searched King's City and the surrounding cities several times and claimed that all the witches had been executed by him. No, but, Veronica, sister. I don't want you to die. When I heard the news, I was also very shocked. I thought that if you didn't leave without permission, maybe you would be fine. Veronica. She had not heard this name for a long time. However, after so many years, she was not as trusting as she used to be. The trembling magic told her the answer. The latter half of Hyde's words were all lies. How did you get together with Viscount Datsomi? This. He paused for a moment. After the death of old Guylan, there were constant quarrels in the family. I don't know the details, but I know that when I inherited the title, there was almost no money left in the family. At that time, Lord Viscount came knocking on my door, and I had no other choice. Lie, he forced you to join the Somi family? Yes, he said that if I didn't agree, he would get rid of me. Then what are you doing for him now? Nightingale asked calmly. Helping the poor. No, Hyde gritted his teeth. He was just using me as a cover. In fact, he was selling Dreamland water. Those rats who helped him transport goods were among the crowd. I only discovered his trick recently. The magic did not respond to the first half of Hyde's words, but the latter half was still a lie. Nightingale found that she was not angry, but rather relaxed. Yes, this was the feeling. This was the state of a normal conversation. Endless lies, mixed truths. People's hearts were always changing. Even if they were connected by blood, they could not hear each other's true thoughts. Since the awakening of her ability, she had long been accustomed to such situations, whether it was in the face of lies or in the process of stripping the truth from layers of deception. Instead, it was Roland's conversation, in which she could not detect the pulsation of magic, that made it difficult for her to adapt. At this moment, the shadowy killer who lurked in the darkness and made the nobles in the central region tremble had returned. What's your next plan? Upon hearing this, Hyde suddenly fell to the ground and begged, Sister, please help me. Help you? He crawled 2 steps forward. I know it was my fault. But I'm your brother. Lord Viscount doesn't treat me as a noble at all. You've seen it, he actually gave me the servant's house to use. The restoration of this mansion is just a cover-up. If I continue to stay here, he will attack me sooner or later. So you want me to take you away? Go. Then there will be nothing left, right? Hyde shook his head in panic and then said with hatred, You killed old Guylan, didn't you? Although I don't know what kind of ability you used, you can easily enter this place, so you can definitely enter his bedroom. Sister, kill him. As long as he dies, I will have a chance to become a real Somi noble. Then you can kill the other heirs one by one. This territory, and all the properties of the Somi family will belong to us. Nightingale stared into his eyes and did not answer for a long time until Hyde lowered his head anxiously again. Then she said, Before that, I want to ask you a question. Yes, yes. The younger brother answered quickly. Chapter 883. She had thought it would take him a long time to think about this question, but she did not expect to get an answer so quickly. Why? Hyde was startled. Because you're a witch. Her magic power did not beat. So that's why. Nightingale suddenly understood many things. Witches were the devil's minions and the incarnation of the fallen. Once a witch became a witch, she would gradually lose her feelings as a human. At that time, this theory was deeply rooted in people's hearts. Perhaps the moment Hyde learned of her awakening, she was no longer a human in his eyes, let alone a sister and a brother who were related by blood. The so-called betrayal was just a way to protect himself by striking first. Hyde probably still thought so, and it was precisely because he completely trusted his own judgment that he answered so naturally. Later, Hyde said a lot more. For example, he was ignorant before and did not know that it was a false accusation made by the church. He also said that he was now deeply remorseful and hoped that she could forgive him. But Nightingale did not listen to these words. The thoughts in her mind were like a storm, making it difficult for her to recover. So she should not blame him at all. Was it because most people would have made the same choice? For him, the one he betrayed was not his own sister, but a demon who would lose her humanity sooner or later. Since it was a demon, it was understandable that there was no trust between them. But, was it true? She was clearly asking about Hyde, but her consciousness unconsciously drifted to another person. That person was also a noble, but she had never seen him before, let alone by blood. If betraying a witch was a matter of course, then he should have sent Anna to the gallows long ago. He had neither fear nor hatred for witches. Except for curiosity, his eyes were clear and easy to understand, even though she had threatened him with a knife. Scenes flashed by quickly, as if they were going back in time, and finally stopped at the moment before the heavy snow fell. It was the first winter after they met. I don't think she can't survive the months of demons. Why? She said she wouldn't lose to the demonic bite, and I believe her. How could you believe a witch? We're cursed by the devil. Really? I believe you too. The sea of memories rippled with these words. Nightingale took a deep breath and pulled her consciousness back to reality. Wait here. If someone comes looking for you, do what you have to do. Pretend that I was never here. Wait, where are you going? She sheathed the dagger at her waist and disappeared into the fog. To finish what I have to do. As Hyde had said, she could have broken into Viscount Sommi's bedroom and forced him to tell the whole story with a dagger. Most of the nobles would be scared out of their wits when they saw the gleaming tip of a knife. They would answer every question, hating the fact that they didn't have two mouths. Some of the more stubborn ones would spill out their secrets without hesitation after their fingernails were cut off. She had already verified this many times. If her parents' death was really related to the Viscount, she would naturally let him know what it meant to pay with blood. However, Nightingale didn't want to do that at the moment. Especially after what had just happened. She was no longer alone. She now had someone she could trust without a doubt, and she was also deeply trusted by others. Compared to the Shadow Assassin's approach, she wanted to try to solve this matter in another way. If it was Roland, he would definitely not want to see her stained with too much unnecessary blood, right? After crossing the world of mist, Nightingale entered Dot's study in a few flashes. Several dark black holes that looked like ink-colored balls stood in the black and white world. She didn't care about the sleeping guard leaning against the door. Instead, she set her eyes on a field of God's stone next to the bookcase. She slowly walked to the wall. The straight wall suddenly twisted. The contours bent and shrunk like a clump of hair that had lost its source of nourishment. The thing underneath was exposed. Through the deformed contours, she saw details that ordinary people couldn't see. A thin metal rod was buried under the wall. One part was connected to the bookcase, and the other was connected to the black ball. This was a very common mechanism. Nightingale easily destroyed the hanging bell under the mechanism. Then she pushed a seemingly ordinary book. The secret compartment opened almost without making any sound. There was a God's stone of retaliation embedded in the hidden box, but this was not a problem for her. Before she was an adult, old Guylan had found a rat instructor to teach her all the skills that a qualified thief should have. After several years of practice, she had already mastered the skill of opening all kinds of locks with copper needles. After opening 3 or 4 iron boxes, Nightingale found what she was looking for. It was a recent account book, which recorded the batches, buyers, and quantities of Dreamland water. Just as she expected, the nobles always liked to hide their important items in places that they thought were secret. With this record and the goods in the mansion that had not been sold, the evidence was conclusive. Nightingale returned to the basement and reported the whole thing to Roland. When the sky turned bright, the First Army, who had received the order to rush over, had already surrounded the mansion. 3 days later, Nightingale appeared in front of Hyde again. Hyde had just been released from prison. He looked so haggard and dazed that he almost looked like a walking corpse. It was not until he saw Nightingale that a trace of color appeared in his eyes. Anger and hatred. Viscount Somi has been sentenced to death by hanging. The rest of the family members have to serve 20 years of labor. 2 fiefs belong to the kingdom. Is this what you made me wait for? Walking into a deserted alley, Hyde could no longer suppress his emotions. He growled at her. Take everything away from me and leave me with nothing. You should feel lucky that you're not regarded as a member of the Somi family, Nightingale said calmly. Compared to the Viscount, at least you're still alive. That's just because you want me to continue to suffer so that you can laugh at me. 8 years ago, it was like this again. You killed old Guylan and left. Do you know what kind of life I've been living since then? I thought you would help me when I finally got the chance to take over the Somi family's territory, but you ruined it. Hyde clenched his fists. I don't have a title or a fief now. Are you satisfied now? You haven't forgiven me at all, Veronica. You liar. All you want is revenge. I should have known. As he spoke, there was a hint of sobbing in his roar. Then, he curled up his body and sobbed softly, nothing. I have nothing. After a long silence, Nightingale said, yes, I haven't forgiven you, and I never will. The more similar a person is, the more unforgivable a betrayal is. She paused. But you don't have nothing. At least I gave you freedom. Hyde, whose face was covered with snot and filth, looked up. No matter old Guylan, the Somi family, or anyone else, no one can control you. From now on, how you live and what you can do is up to you. You won't be controlled by others like a puppet like in the past. Whether you think this is punishment, torture, hate me or not, it doesn't matter. That's your choice. From now on, we have nothing to do with each other. Chapter 884. The golden setting sun slowly sank into the forest, giving the surrounding clouds a golden silhouette. The sky changed from blue to white, and from white to red. Finally, the afterglow sprinkled on the earth, turning the lush grassland red. At the end of the Guylan family's territory, there was a raised slope. Standing on it, one could see the house, the farmland, and the woods that connected the valley. When Nightingale was little, she liked to ride on her father's shoulder to climb the low slope so that she could have a panoramic view of the whole family. Therefore, when her parents' bodies were sent back, and the servant asked her where she wanted to bury them, she chose the slope without hesitation. At that time, although she was heartbroken, she was still a little unwilling to believe that her family had suddenly left. She only thought that if her parents could open their eyes again, no matter where she and her brother were at home, they would be the first to see them. Now that she was in front of her parents' tombstones again, Nightingale had a completely different feeling. There was not much dust on the tombstones. Apparently, someone was still cleaning the place. She bent down and neatly folded a stack of white paper in front of the 2 tombstones. It was the verdict of Viscount Somi. Faced with irrefutable evidence, the Viscount's psychological defense soon collapsed. After Roland promised that he would not punish underage children, he not only admitted that he sold Dreamland water, but also confessed the cause and effect of the annexation of the Guylan family. It turned out that the valley that separated the 2 families' territories did hide a treasure. However, it was not a gemstone vein, but a suspected gold mine. The person who found it was the Somi farmer. Due to the different terrain, the ravine that was considered a valley to the Guylan family was gradually leveled with the ground in the Somi territory. Farmers often went downstream to fetch water and bathe. That was until one day, when a lucky man found a grain of gold sand in a mountain spring. He called the others to search for it and fight for it. That was when Somi's attention was attracted. After that, he immediately blocked the news and sent people along the valley to look for the source of the gold sand. However, the report from his men disappointed him. The searchers did find more gold sand upstream. It seemed that the erosion of the rainwater had caused the walls of the valley to collapse, allowing the floating coarse gold to fall into the water. However, more and more evidence showed that the gold mine was likely to be on the side of the Guylan family, so the exploration had to be stopped. Because of Silver City's special status, the number of knight and escorts that the nobles were allowed to own was more or less limited, so it was impossible to rob the city openly. Viscount Somi was unwilling to give up on this huge treasure, so he turned his attention to Viscount Gelen. His breakthrough was Old Gailen, a distant relative of the Gilens. The plan was simple but ruthless. He took advantage of the fact that Old Gailen had neither a title nor a fief to entice him to cooperate with him. He promised that as long as he gave him a piece of land, the Gailen family would have a new master. The latter obviously could not resist the temptation of becoming a true noble and agreed to his scheme. So bribed the rats and killed the Gilens while the refugees were rioting. Old Gailen took in Hyde and Nightingale, who were still minors, and began to manage the territory on his behalf. As long as Hyde came of age, it would be easy to force him to give up his fief and title. An heir without protection was no different from a caged bird. Even if other nobles suspected him, they would only think that Old Gailen was too greedy. At this point, it was a foregone conclusion. However, Nightingale's awakening revealed a flaw in the plan. She disappeared without a trace after killing Old Gailen on the day she came of age, and Old Gailen did not get the title he dreamed of until the moment he breathed his last. Somi had to change his plan. He could rope in Old Gailen, but he could not get everyone in the Gailen family to side with him. After all, there was only one title that he could use as a bargaining chip. He had to use it when it mattered. Ironically, it was Hyde who he finally found. When Nightingale heard this, she thought it was ridiculous. Hyde's property was used as a bargaining chip, and Hyde naively thought that the Viscount would help him. Without much hesitation, he agreed to the proposal of the person who killed his family. With the Viscount's support, Hyde stood out from a group of relatives who were fighting for power and profit. He finally kept his title and became the official heir of the Gailen family. Then, as promised, he merged into the Somi family. It was not that he kept his promise. After the internal strife, the family's industry was on the verge of collapse, and most of his subjects had been lost. He had no other choice but to rely on the Somi family. After 10 years of planning, the Viscount finally got what he wanted. He even accumulated the huge amount of capital needed to open a mine by smuggling Dreamland water. As long as he found out the location of the mine, the Somi family would have wealth that could last for hundreds of years. However, the appearance of Roland shattered his dream. For a suspected gold mine, he murdered nobles of the same rank and broke up several families. Nearly 20 people died in the vicious scheme, but all he got was a noose around his neck. From beginning to end, he did not even get a glimpse of the gold mine. Nightingale took out a fire sickle and lit the judgment. She once heard from Roland that there was an ancient way of mourning, which was to tie paper into the shape of the object to be passed on, and then burn it with fire, so that the deceased could receive the object. Because of the psychic fire, there was a certain chance that fireworks with special will could pass through the gate of the world of life and death, especially when the two worlds were closest to each other at dusk. Nightingale hoped that through this ceremony, the news of the murderer's execution could be told to the souls of her parents. Although Roland added that he did not really believe in the existence of the world of life and death, she did not care. Rather than saying that he was comforting his parents, it was more like he was comforting himself. By the time she reached the bottom of the slope, the sky was already completely dark. Roland was waiting for her not far away. When she saw the familiar figure, her helpless heart suddenly fell to the ground. Is this really okay? Let that guy leave unscathed. Roland curled his lips. I've wanted to teach him a lesson for a long time. Oh. In what capacity? Nightingale raised her eyebrows. Ah. He coughed twice. Of course, as a king. Nightingale smiled and shook her head. His business is over, and it has nothing to do with me anymore. If you really want, you can send someone to find him and beat him up again. Since you've said so, then forget it, Roland said as he spread out his hands. Well, by the way. Nightingale suddenly stopped and knelt on one knee. She put her hand on her chest and saluted as if she was swearing allegiance for the first time. Your Majesty, from now on, can you also allow me to stay by your side and serve you? Why do you suddenly mention this? Roland was stunned. Didn't I say it before? But I want to hear you say it again, Nightingale insisted. The string of magic did not tremble in the slightest. It was as quiet and gentle as the earth in the night. It was great to meet him. Chapter 885. The king was coming. Ever since Roland Wimbledon's army entered Redwater City, the news began to spread in the streets and alleys of the old king's city and reached its peak after the Lord of Silver City surrendered. Although a small number of people repeatedly stressed that he had not ascended to the throne, compared to the title of rebel king and invader a year ago, most people now believed that the future king of Greycastle was none other than Roland. It was even possible that he had come here for the coronation. However, the new king did not seem to be very active. He would stay in a city for a few weeks, so when the news came true, it was already the middle of summer. The rising temperature did not dampen people's spirits. Taverns were full of people talking about the coronation ceremony, ribbons were tied on both sides of the street, and all the houses higher than 2 stories near the palace were rented out. The old king's city, which had gradually become desolate, seemed to have regained its former vitality. Perhaps it was only at this time that the people living here could remember the style of a king's city. After a year, Roland set foot on this territory again. The moment he passed through the city gate, the flower petals collected by the girls were scattered all over the sky, and the cheers of the people instantly ignited the whole city. They were not praising the wisdom or benevolence of the new king, but for the people of the king's city, it was just a habit. Nini and Pod were one of them. Because they happened to live in a tower close to the main street, they got the best seats overlooking the whole scene. Their parents were too busy entertaining the spectators who rented the houses, so they had no time to discipline the 2 kids. They were also happy to climb to the top of the tower and lie on the red tiles to watch the grand scene of the army entering the city. He's here, he's here. Is the man standing on the carriage His Majesty the King? He looks much younger than the second prince, Nini exclaimed. Wow, look, he's waving to us. Sir Timothy would never do such a thing. He's waving to everyone in this direction. Pod shrugged. We're so high up, it would be strange if he noticed us. Of course, we are included in everyone. Isn't that right? Nini said confidently. Just by looking at his appearance, he is much kinder than the second prince. Then the kind king hanged a large number of nobles, including His Highness Timothy, his brother. The makeshift gallows in the square are still there. If we count the rats, he would be the ruler who killed the most people in the capital. Hey, why do you always disagree with me? Nini glared at him angrily. I don't like him, Pod pouted. He doesn't treat this city as his home at all. He tells everyone that there are more jobs in the western region and encourages people to go there. What should we do? Isn't it all because of him that my father's tavern has lost more than half of its customers? Then who do you like, the second prince? I'm also disgusting. Just to catch a witch, he made the whole city restless. The old king is still the best, at least he won't, oh my god, look. The woman next to His Majesty. Nini did not wait for him to finish. She immediately forgot about the topic of dispute and pointed at the open carriage of the king and exclaimed, she turned around. Oh my god, she's so beautiful. Pod could only sigh helplessly. However, this discovery seemed to have become the new focus of attention. The significance of being able to sit in the same carriage with the king was self-evident. The noisy discussion on both sides of the street suddenly became louder. Obviously, everyone was full of interest in this strange and beautiful woman. Right at this moment, the 2 of them suddenly heard a strange whistling sound. Before they could react, a gray figure flashed past them like an arrow that left the bow and went straight into the tower. Then there was a panicked scream from downstairs, as if someone had fallen to the ground, and the crisp sound of a wine glass breaking could be heard. What was that? Nini said in surprise. I don't know, but it seems to be coming for our house. Pod anxiously turned over and stood up. Let's go back and have a look. Okay. The two of them climbed down the brick wall one after the other and jumped into the house through the window. To their surprise, they found that several warriors in armor had already surrounded the guests. Other than spilled wine and broken utensils, there were also a few feathers on the ground. Nini's first reaction was that Pod's words about His Majesty had been overheard, and her second reaction was to cover his mouth and hide. No matter what he saw, he should not make a sound. However, neither of these two ideas came true. The moment they landed, the warriors noticed the two uninvited guests, but none of them came to arrest them. Instead, they grinned at them. After a quarter of an hour, this group of people quickly filed out, leaving only the stunned parents and guests. One of them, who seemed to be the leader, took out 10 silver royals and handed them to the stunned father. After everyone had left, Nini hesitantly walked forward and asked, "What on earth happened?" "It was incredible," the father said excitedly. When the honor guard turned the corner of the street, a spectator suddenly took out a loaded crossbow and aimed it directly at His Majesty in the carriage. Nini gasped and asked, "And then?" "We were all scared. If the arrow was shot, everyone in the house would have died. Fortunately, a person flew in and stopped that guy." "A person?" "Not exactly. She was a bird when she flew in, but when she hit that person's head, she turned into a person." "She was a little girl about your age," a guest added. "We only reacted when we saw the crossbow fall to the ground. We rushed up and pinned the assassin down. After that, the warriors broke the door and rushed in." "Are you sure you didn't see wrongly?" Pod questioned. "That bird? No. Where is the person who can turn into a bird? Did you guys secretly drink the dreamland water and start hallucinating? By the time we subdued the assassin, she was already gone." The father raised his hand and slapped the back of his son's head, causing him to stagger. "And if you doubt me, you'll suffer." The crowd could not help but laugh. Nini, however, focused her attention on the feathers. They looked like the feathers of an ordinary goshawk, but much wider and softer. She carefully collected the feathers and pinned them to the ends of her hair. She looked up and down in the mirror. "She looks like she can fly." The little girl thought contentedly. "I'll make a new headdress with these feathers." The seemingly thrilling assassination did not cause any commotion. People quickly shifted the topic back to the king and his entourage. Unbeknownst to them, at least a dozen similar incidents had happened. However, under the vigilance of Sylvie, all the solo missions that relied on luck failed without exception. In fact, most of the premeditated actions were carried out without alerting the people around them. The patrol team was able to take down the target directly. "Thank you." Roland took the opportunity to nod at the carriage behind him. "I didn't expect there to be so many people in the old King's City. It seems that the situation is not as stable as I thought." "It's my duty, Your Majesty," Sylvie replied. "Since you know it's not stable, you shouldn't have chosen this way to enter the city," Agatha said in a harsh voice. Perhaps it was because of her age, but whenever it came to security, Roland felt that her temperament was becoming more and more like Scrolls. Mortals are too fragile. Sometimes, a small wound can kill you. "I'll stop all attacks," Anna said calmly. "Besides, Nana Pine is also in the team. You can't spoil him like that." "Ahem." Roland hurriedly interrupted. "For the sake of publicity, this little risk is acceptable. As the new king, he has to be familiar with the people." In the carriage sat Sylvie, Agatha, Isabella, Phyllis, and Zoe. Together with the elites of the First Army, it was almost impossible for such a powerful lineup to go wrong. These are two different things. You can choose a more reliable method, such as standing on the high platform in the palace to preach to your subjects. Indeed, but he could not say that this was more for the sake of patrolling, such as putting 2 microphones in front of the carriage and saying, "Hello comrades." "Your Majesty, we're almost at the palace," the guard reminded. His words also stopped Agatha from preaching. Roland breathed a sigh of relief. Through the newly decorated gate of the inner city wall, he saw a procession of nearly 100 people, who were respectfully waiting for his arrival. Among them were old ministers of the western region like Theo and Berev's disciples, and there were also many new ministers who had surrendered to the lower nobility. However, most of them were scholars and civilians who had been recruited by the local area. After finishing the last renovation, the entire central region of Grey Castle would officially be under his control. When the Eastern Front Army occupied Seawanshire, Grey Castle would be considered a preliminary unified kingdom. When the carriage stopped, Roland lifted his cloak in high spirits, stepped out of the carriage, and waved to the people behind him. Chapter 886. Greetings, Your Majesty. As the ceremonial officer, Blanche Orlando, took the lead in saluting, all the officials knelt together, forming a low human wall on both sides of the palace. Greetings, Your Majesty. Next were the attendants and servants in the courtyard, who were responsible for the daily chores in the palace. Wherever Roland looked, everyone lowered their heads, their expressions full of respect and fear. Greetings, Your Majesty. Finally, it was the First Army who followed behind him. Their shouts were especially loud, as if they were endless waves. Roland had thought that he had a certain immunity to such an occasion because he had seen so many people and seen so many magnificent military parades. However, only after experiencing it himself did he realize that the feeling of being looked up to by so many people, no matter how many times he experienced it, would make his blood race. Amidst the cheers of the crowd, Roland walked up the stairs step by step and entered the core area of the old king's city, the Holy Temple of Twin Towers. After he sat on the throne, the officials entered the hall one after another and lined up in 3 rows in front of the throne. Seeing nearly 100 people, Roland could not help but feel a little emotional. The City of Dawn was indeed the center of the Grey Castle Kingdom in the past. In just a year, it had recruited so many people who could read and write. What was even more commendable was that most of them were civilians. Apart from Neverwinter, this level of education was probably one of the best in this era. Your Majesty, this is your scepter. Blanche handed over a golden scepter, which was not only engraved with exquisite patterns, but also embedded with a clear sapphire at the end. It was made by a professional goldsmith. Every king has a different scepter. Roland was not interested in this naked symbol of power, because it was too straightforward and crude, making people feel like he was a nouveau riche. However, he soon realized that this object wasn't just for show. After all, it wasn't easy to get everyone's attention in such a spacious hall. But the scepter could do this very well. He raised the scepter and knocked on the floor. Soon, the crowd quieted down. You all know who I am, so there's no need for any opening remarks. Roland scanned the entire hall and said slowly, the purpose of my trip is very simple. Firstly, it's to eliminate threats, and secondly, it's to restore order. The former does not only refer to those who oppose the new policy, but also those who obstruct the implementation of the new policy. No matter if they were nobles, merchants, freedmen, or rats, as long as they are detrimental to the new policy, they will end up no different from rebels. The latter is to formalize order, which is to establish an administrative system similar to that of Neverwinter. You should have already heard that once you become an official of the City Hall, you can enjoy generous remuneration and treatment, and the road to promotion has nothing to do with bloodline or family background. In other words, as long as you have enough ability, even a commoner can have the opportunity to become a minister of a department, or even the prime minister. The crowd immediately started whispering to each other. Not to mention the commoners, even a small noble wouldn't dare to dream of such a high position in the past. It was no secret in the old king's city that Berev, a disciple of the Minister of Finance, had become a hot figure in His Majesty's court. At the thought of the opportunity to become a minister of the royal family, the people's eyes lit up. But not everyone can enter the city hall. You have to pass the test, Roland said unhurriedly. The murmurs grew louder. Your Majesty, may I ask what the test is about? A bold person asked. It's a question and answer about reliability. This is also a part of the Neverwinter City Hall's examination, Roland explained with a smile. You don't have to answer all the questions correctly to pass, but you have to at least meet the minimum requirements. As for the specific content, we'll only tell you before the test. In fact, this set of questions and answers was a variation of the 10 questions of loyalty written by Scroll. At the same time, some questions about the people's attitude towards work and expectations were added, mainly to ensure the purity of the team. The reason why it was not called a loyalty question and answer was to avoid scaring away people who thought too much. In this era, disloyalty was definitely a serious crime, and it could be a big or small crime. Did it count for insulting the royal family in their hearts? Did it count for making up stories about the king when they were drunk? However, which commoner did not complain in private? Not to mention the nobles. According to the law, these were all acts of disloyalty. If they heard that this was going to be investigated, most people would try to avoid it. Of course, Nightingale would not be able to investigate everyone clearly in the future. But at least in the initial stage, Roland still hoped to ensure the political system was as reliable as possible. After all, as long as these people could adapt to the new administrative system, they would most likely become the backbone of the government in the future. In addition, after choosing to join the city hall, you have to give up your original property, Roland continued. In short, city hall officials are not allowed to have any business dealings with any businessmen. Otherwise, you'll be punished with a felony. I hope everyone will consider this carefully. Roland's words were like a basin of cold water. The hall suddenly quieted down. Unlike the people in Border Town, almost everyone in the old King's City had their own livelihood. It was undoubtedly a dilemma for them to abandon everything they had accumulated in the past and devote themselves to a new job. But to promote the concept of professionalization, this was an inevitable step. Even if some people would hand over their property to distant relatives or hire others to manage it, they had to maintain it on the surface. Roland knew that there were no real officials in the Four Kingdoms. The so-called ministers were the nobles trusted by the king. It was an honor rather than a duty to handle affairs for His Majesty. When the honor was gone or when there was a crisis, the first thing they would consider was their own interests. Professionalization, on the other hand, tied people to their posts. There was no way out. It could be seen as the unification of interests. Only when the kingdom was prosperous would they get more benefits. Another point was that the separation of business and politics could, to a certain extent, avoid the awkward situation of being both a player and a referee. Finally, regardless of position, the name of any official city hall official will be recorded in front of my case. Seeing the gloomy atmosphere, Roland threw out the sweetener he had prepared. Your treatment and position will not only be effective in one city. As long as it's under my rule, I'll recognize your power. This was the trump card of the professional bureaucratic system, the establishment. The significance of being part of the system was self-evident. It was not only a form of recognition but also the most stable guarantee. The people in the hall might not realize its benefits immediately, but as time went by, they would eventually understand the wonderful taste of being part of the state. Since the old King's City had been screened several times, the aristocratic class was almost non-existent. It was much more convenient to reorganize the city than the previous cities. Although many people still had doubts, no one jumped out to oppose it openly. They just wanted to give it a try. When the meeting was over, a long line soon formed at the registration office. When Roland returned to his study and was about to summon Theo, Yorko, and other old fellows for a private chat, a guard hurried in. Your Majesty, a messenger from the guard stationed in the northern region reported that they found the army of the Kingdom of Dawn west of Hermes. Chapter 887. How's the situation in the west? As soon as Nail and Uncle Sang walked into the central tent, Eagle Face, the commander of the northern region garrison, asked eagerly. The number of those people is still increasing. The veteran saluted and gave a brief account of the surveillance over the past week. I was shocked. I didn't expect the Kingdom of Dawn to be able to gather so many soldiers. How many? Eagle Face did not care at all and poured them a cup of tea. 8,000? Or 9,000? I'm afraid there are more than 10,000 of them. Uncle Sang finished his tea in one gulp. The tents alone extend for nearly a mile. There are at least 20 unknown flags. I don't know where they found these idiots. More than 10,000. Eagle Face stopped writing. You can ask our squad leader if you don't believe me. He pointed to Nail beside him and said, in order to estimate the number of people, we risked being discovered and approached the old holy city to investigate. The outskirts of the city are filled with the troops of the nobles of the Kingdom of Dawn. They've blocked the road between Hermes and the Kingdom of Dawn. Most of the refugees have turned around and evacuated to the Kingdom of Wolfheart and the Kingdom of Everwinter. There must be more people in Coldwind Ridge. At least on my way back, I saw several teams of more than 100 people. That's the truth. Nail nodded and added, the Kingdom of Dawn is probably waiting for the reinforcements to arrive. Meanwhile, they've increased their vigilance in the surrounding area. I suggest that the follow-up investigation team stay away from the old holy city in case they're discovered by the patrolling knight. Ever since the Northern Region garrison had noticed the unusual situation in Hermes, they had begun to infiltrate the plateau with the help of Duke Kant, hoping to obtain more information and to prepare for the upcoming battle. However, His Majesty did not approve of Eagle Face's attack plan. He only asked them to remain vigilant and continue to investigate. The deputy battalion commander had no choice but to give up the idea of launching a large-scale attack. He picked suitable people from the garrison to disguise themselves as refugees and took turns to monitor the new and old holy cities. Meanwhile, he continued to send information to Neverwinter. Of course, he had done something in the past few months. After confirming that the holy city was not playing a trick, the Northern Region garrison took back Coldwind Ridge. As for the appearance of the army of the Kingdom of Dawn, it happened 2 or 3 weeks ago. Sir, are you worried that these people will harm His Majesty's plan? Ha ha ha, how is that possible? Eagle Face burst into laughter. Even if they double in number, they're just a bunch of slow targets in front of the First Army. Even the God's Punishment Army can't break through the defense line blocked by machine guns. How can they get close to His Majesty? On the contrary, it was better to have more people. First, let them charge the walls of the holy city and test out the strength of the church. It would be best if both sides suffered heavy losses. If it really comes to that, His Majesty will definitely agree with my plan. He paused for a moment. Thank you for your hard work in this round of investigation. Go and have a rest. Yes, sir, Uncle Sang saluted. Nail did not turn around and leave. Instead, he hesitated and said, can't we defeat them in advance? Both of them were stunned. What? His Majesty doesn't allow us to attack Hermes, but it doesn't mean that he won't allow us to stop the army of the Kingdom of Dawn, right? Nail bit his lip and said, if we wait until they attack the holy city, I'm afraid that the foot of Mount Hermes will be in ruins. The veteran sighed. Did you see something? Eagle Face frowned. Looting and slaughtering. Nail covered his forehead with his hand and almost did not want to recall those bloody scenes. They haven't entered the old holy city yet. They just stationed on the periphery. They caught the surrounding residents and impaled them on sharp wooden sticks. Then, they used the sticks to block the barracks. As for the women, they suffered even worse. Enough, Eagle Face interrupted him. This is a common thing in war. Both the Church and the Kingdom of Dawn are His Majesty's enemies. It's better to let the enemy exhaust the enemy than to exhaust ourselves. And don't forget that we're an army, a sharp sword in His Majesty's hand. It's also our duty to kill people. But it's different. Nail insisted. We're fighting for His Majesty's goal, but they're just killing for the sake of killing. Those villagers are not believers, but in front of them, they're even worse than prey. Sir, he's just a little irritated. Seeing the displeased look on Eagle Face, Uncle Sang hurriedly said, you too. Do you know what you're talking about? As long as the church doesn't fall, we can't cross the Hermes Plateau under their watch. How can we stop those people from the Kingdom of Dawn? The new holy city was like a huge fortress, connecting the plateau and the flat area into a whole. The 4 city gates on the periphery corresponded to 4 passages leading to different kingdoms. Although the new city was unguarded and refugees could freely enter and exit, it did not mean that the church would sit back and watch the first army march into the territory of the Kingdom of Dawn. Nail naturally knew this. He took a deep breath and said, "In fact, there's a small path." A small path? When I came back, I talked to some of the refugees. One of them told me that there was a small path that could fit 2 people in the steep cliff on the outskirts of the plateau. In winter, the path will be blocked by snow and ice, but when the snow melts, we can cross the Hermes Plateau without entering the holy city. Eagle Face stared at him for a while and then shook his head. "Forget about it." Nail lowered his head and said no more. "In fact, you also know that this is not a reliable, no, it's an impossible battle plan." Surprisingly, the deputy battalion commander did not get angry. "Let's not talk about whether the small path really exists. Even if we can reach the old holy city, we can't defeat tens of thousands of enemies." His Majesty made it very clear in the evening cram class that before an army takes action, the first thing to consider is logistics. It's difficult to transport supplies on a 2-person wide mountain path, let alone machine guns and ammunition. In addition, there are only 500 people in the entire northern garrison, and the ammunition allocated is not enough to support a protracted battle. Once the enemy is not defeated, we will become an isolated army without any support, and there is a possibility that the entire army will be wiped out. Eagle Face stood up and walked to Nail. "I want a war of annihilation more than you do, but that's just my personal opinion. His Majesty and Sir Iron Axe have entrusted this army to me, so the first thing I have to consider is the safety and interests of the army, whether it's the resettlement of the refugees or this decision. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Excellency." Nail clenched his fists and finally made a military salute. "You can leave now." Just as the 2 were about to leave, a soldier lifted the curtain and came in. "Your Excellency, His Majesty's reply has arrived." "Oh. Let me see it." Eagle Face quickly took the secret letter and opened it. Before Nail and Uncle Sang walked out of the tent, he stopped them again. "Wait. Does His Majesty have any new instructions?" the veteran asked. "Yes. The First Army has set off from King's City by ship and is heading for the northern region at full speed. It's estimated that they will arrive at Coldwind Ridge in 10 days. 10 days, it's too late, Nail thought sadly. The army of the Kingdom of Dawn could enter the old holy city at any time. In 1 or 2 days, they could turn all the towns at the foot of Mount Hermes into hell. In a trance, he saw the woman in red struggling in the hail of bullets, as if she was accusing him of what he had done. Before that, His Majesty asked us to take action immediately to stop the army of the Kingdom of Dawn from entering the old holy city. At least, we can't let them loot the monastery. Nail suddenly raised his head. Can we do that?" Uncle Sang scratched his head. Chapter 888. Twain felt that he was out of luck. He was just an ordinary merchant who traveled between the city of Evernight and Hermes for a decent profit. He sold the furs and flannels from Grey Castle to the church and brought back some amulets or statues soaked in holy water. The competition in this business was fierce. He had worked hard for nearly 10 years to gain a foothold in both places. Now that he had some extra money, he wanted to expand his business. Therefore, he bought a house with a warehouse outside the new holy city to store his goods. Just when he was about to make a fortune, the situation in the north took a turn for the worse. First, the new king of Grey Castle had a fierce conflict with the church. The demand for items of faith such as amulets had plummeted, so he had to return home empty-handed, losing almost 1/5 of his income. But as long as he could still do the fur business, he would not lose all his money. Moreover, because of the conflict, the price of the furs increased. At that time, he thought that the church would win sooner or later. As a frequent visitor to the holy city, he naturally knew how powerful the church was. The knight, who could do whatever he wanted in the kingdom, was no match for a judgment warrior who had undergone strict training in Hermes. However, to his surprise, the church not only lost, but also suffered a crushing defeat. His business was completely halted. Even when the price was reduced by 30%, no one was interested. It was not until the holy city collapsed and the warehouse was ransacked that Twain realized that this place had become a dangerous place. In other words, ever since he learned that the cathedral had collapsed overnight, he had a hunch that something bad was about to happen. However, he was still reluctant to abandon his hard-earned property. The news of the appearance of the army of the Kingdom of Dawn at the foot of Mount Hermes was the last straw that broke the camel's back. The purpose of that group of people appearing here was self-evident. There was no doubt that they were after the wealth accumulated by the church for hundreds of years. Once they became enraged, not to mention the furs, he was afraid that he would lose his life here. After making the decision, Twain followed the merchants all the way south. After several days of hard work, they finally returned to the territory of Greycastle. The soldiers stationed at the border did not make things difficult for them. After a simple interrogation, they were brought to a special camp and told that the Duke of the Northern Territories caravan would take them back to the city in 2 days. Twain originally thought that this nightmare had finally come to an end. Although his business of several years had gone up in smoke, at least he was still alive. He still had a house in Evernight City that could shelter him from the wind and rain, and his wife and children were still waiting for him. Unlike his old rival, the miser, Sawcause, who died on the way to escape. Thinking of this, he felt much better. But in less than a day, this sense of security disappeared without a trace. 2 warriors of the new king found him and brought him out of the camp. He tried to give them a few silver royals in an attempt to find out what was going on, but he was refused. Could it be that the other party wanted to take advantage of him? Tangin couldn't help but clutch the money pouch in his arms. This was the last of his family property. If it was snatched away, he really wouldn't be able to continue living. But should he not give it to her? He didn't have the courage to do so. He definitely couldn't refuse a brutal army that could defeat the church. If he angered this group of killers, he would probably end up even worse. As he walked, Tangin couldn't help but want to howl. Why was he so unlucky? There were so many merchants, but why did they pick him? Was it because he threw all the talismans and statues into the ravine that he couldn't sell and was cursed by the gods? This feeling of despair caused his mind to be distracted, and he did not quickly recover until a commander who claimed to be the deputy battalion commander asked him a question. What trail? The commander didn't get angry. Instead, he asked again calmly, one of my soldiers said that you know of a trail that doesn't pass through the new holy city and goes directly to the foot of Mount Hermes. Is that right? It's the one you told me about. Some merchants often use it to smuggle some high-value goods. You followed them a few times, the other added. Wait. Not for the golden dragon in my arms? Tangin stole a glance at the latter and found that the one who spoke was the young warrior he met on the road. He seemed to be called Nail. At that time, Tangin saw that Nail was quite enthusiastic, so he chatted with him for a while, hoping to win his approval by stealing the church's business tax. He didn't expect that his action would bring him so much trouble. But now that things had come to this, it was useless to regret. Well, there's indeed such a trail. The locals call it the Cloud Ladder, Tangin replied reluctantly. It only appears after the snow melts every year. It's impassable when it's foggy and raining. It's said that there are several exits, but I only know the one that leads to the direction of the Kingdom of Dawn. Very well, the commander nodded. Take my men there. As long as they pass, I'll reward you. I wouldn't dare, sir. Tangin immediately knelt down. How could I dare to ask for your reward? I only hope that you'll let me go home after the trip. Unfortunately, that won't do. The commander's words immediately chilled Tangin's heart. To ensure that nothing goes wrong, you'll have to follow us for the next few days until the mission is completed. But sir, before Tangin could finish his words, 5 golden dragon stones were thrown in front of him. This is the deposit. You'll have 5 more after the mission, the commander interrupted. You should know that in most places in Grey Castle, 10 golden dragon stones can buy you. Tang En swallowed. After so many years of business, he only had a little more than 30 golden dragon stones in his pocket. The commander's meaning was clear: this was the money to buy his life, and it was impossible for him to refuse. Will you really let me go? Although he knew that this question was meaningless, he still could not help asking. Of course. As long as you do your best to guide us, I'll send someone to send you safely back to the city of Evernight. You can rest assured about this. Tang En left the camp, worried about his gains and losses, only to find that he was accompanied by the young Nail and an old warrior. You got me into trouble, Tang En said with a wry smile. Judging from their expressions, this was probably just a coincidence and not a deliberate attempt to frame them. How could I get you into trouble? Nail frowned. 10 golden dragon stones is by no means a small amount. As long as you don't have any bad intentions, you don't have to worry about any danger. Don't worry. The boss is very reliable. If he says he'll let you go, he'll definitely let you go. The old warrior interrupted. Besides, I'll be more than happy to get 10 golden dragon stones just by leading the way. Just call me Uncle Sang. Also, don't use honorifics. If you want to use honorifics, you should use them on Nail. He's the squad leader, 1 level higher than me. Is that so? Tang En could not help but feel a little embarrassed. He had always thought that this young man was just a low-level soldier. Just call me the same way as before. Nail waved his hand indifferently. Can the two of you tell me, what is the mission that your deputy battalion commander was talking about? We're going to bypass the Hermes Plateau and stop the Kingdom of Dawn's army at the Old Holy City. Squad leader. Uncle Sang reminded. It doesn't matter. Anyway, he'll be with us for the next few days. Leaking some information will make him less paranoid, which will help us complete the task. If he makes any strange moves, I'll kill him immediately. Nail's words made Tang En shudder. However, the first half of Nail's words was even more unbelievable. Stop the Kingdom of Dawn's army? Tang En widened his eyes in surprise. That's impossible. The path is only wide enough for 2 people to walk, and some places have collapsed. If you're not careful, you'll fall off the cliff. Even if you walk from morning to night, you can at most pass through a few hundred people in a week. How are you going to stop the night? Not to mention that the church may attack you from behind. Chapter 889. Reinforcements? Did he understand what I was talking about? Twain twitched the corner of his mouth. Even if the reinforcements came, it would be useless if they could not get through. Or the reinforcements he was referring to were the main forces that could directly flatten Hermes and cross the ruins of the Holy City. But in that case, it would take more than 10 days to prepare for the siege, right? However, seeing that the other side obviously did not want to continue this topic, Twain tactfully closed his mouth. One side of the entrance of the cloud ladder was on the mountain wall not far from Coldwind Ridge. They drilled into an inconspicuous cave, and when they saw the sky again, they were already in the air. When the air was humid, this path would be covered by layers of clouds and mist. Passing through it was like ascending to the heavens. That was how this path got its name. But as long as the weather was good, the road was very reliable. In order to dissuade the First Army, he deliberately exaggerated the danger of the cloud ladder. In fact, because some businessmen attached great importance to its function of avoiding taxes, they strengthened the collapsed part with planks and wedges, so the risk of people passing through was not high. In half a day, he took Nail and others to go back and forth 3 times. Going through the mountain wall, they avoided the rugged mountain road and the checkpoint set up by the Holy City, and at the same time shortened the distance. Therefore, as long as they carried light equipment, it was more efficient than going through the main road. Twain noticed that Nail had been scribbling in a small notebook, as if he was recording something. But the content in the notebook was mixed with many characters that he had never seen before, in addition to the words commonly used on the continent. This surprised him. A soldier could read and write, and also had knowledge that he could not understand at all. If he had not seen it with his own eyes, he would never have believed it. In order to learn accounting and to record the entry and exit of goods, he specially went to a chamber of commerce and learned the basic operation of trading at the price of a golden dragon. If Nail could read and write, why did he need to fight and kill? Although the army of Roland Wimbledon was extremely powerful, people always died in war, and no one could guarantee that they would not be the next one. However, from their conversation, he found that literacy and hand-drawing did not seem to be advanced skills, as if everyone in the First Army could do it. What on earth were these people thinking? Twain found it more and more incomprehensible. By the time they returned to the camp, it was already dusk, but the surroundings of the tent were bustling with noise and excitement. The warriors gathered in groups of 2s and 3s, discussing something excitedly. Their gazes were all focused on the bonfire in the center of the camp. It seems that reinforcements have arrived. Nail grinned. I guess so, Uncle Sang said with a smile. I wonder which acquaintances will come this time. Miss Lightning and Miss Maggie must be inside. The class leader quickened her pace. Let's go take a look. W.H. Watt. Miss? The reinforcements they were waiting for, were they women? Tang An could not help but follow the two of them closely. After finding an empty space, he looked at the crowd. In the next moment, he suddenly felt like he was going to faint. Damn, what kind of reinforcements are they? They were clearly a few brats. Especially the girl whose hair was almost touching the ground. Looking at her round cheeks and big watery eyes, he would believe it if someone said that she was only 10 years old. The others weren't any better. Their arms and legs weren't even the size of a fist. If they were placed on the battlefield, they probably wouldn't even be able to lift a sword, so what use would they be? That was ridiculous to the extreme. He suddenly froze and became uncertain again. One reason was that these girls were far more beautiful than ordinary women. He would not have thought it was strange if there were only 1 or 2 of them, but when a group of them stood together, he immediately thought of the special group of witches. Of course, witches were not as terrible as they were rumored to be. If they were really as strong as the demons of hell, they would have crushed the church and the human kingdom into pieces long ago. As a knowledgeable businessman, Tang En knew that as long as a knight wore a god's stone of retaliation, he could easily kill several witches. Without their abilities, witches were not much stronger than ordinary people. However, it was hard to say if another person joined the battle. Tang En held his breath and focused all his attention on the blue-haired girl. He had seen her, at the celebration in the city of Evernight. Although she was not the most beautiful one in the crowd, she was the most attractive one. Anyone who saw her once would never forget this woman with a unique temperament. Edith Kant, the daughter of the Duke of the City of Evernight, was nicknamed the Pearl of the Northern Region. She could be as beautiful as a flower when socializing, and she could also chop off her opponent's head with a long sword in battle. It was said that her swordsmanship was as outstanding as her facial features. However, the most frightening thing about her was her way of doing things. She was unexpected, eccentric, and impossible to guard against. Those who dared to look down on her just because she was a woman had all paid a heavy price. The residents of the city of Evernight could talk about the rumors about the Pearl of the Northern Region for days and nights. It seemed that Duke Kant had completely sided with the new king. Otherwise, he would never have allowed his beloved daughter to come to the military camp without the protection of guards. Moreover, judging from the respectful attitude of the deputy battalion commander, Edith was worthy of the title of Pearl even though she had left the northern region. After all, the army led by Edith could even defeat the church. With the witches, Edith Kant, and a group of killers, they might be able to cause great trouble to the army of the Kingdom of Dawn. In addition to the reinforcements, there was another thing that aroused Tang En's curiosity. Beside the bonfire, there was an oddly shaped iron frame. Its outline was symmetrical, and it looked a bit like a shoulder pole at first glance. Each of its 2 ends was connected to a frame, and in each frame were 3 rows of metal cylinders with large heads and sharp tails. Tang En could not tell what material they were made of. It was just a metal object, but it made him feel a little uneasy. After looking at it for a while, Tang En finally noticed where the uneasiness came from. There were 9 cylinders as long as a man, and they were almost exactly the same in shape. From the round head all the way to the tucked tail, it displayed a silky and smooth curve. This detail made his palms sweat involuntarily. Metal was the toughest metal. To bend it into a fixed shape, it must be repeatedly burned and hammered. However, according to the blacksmiths he had met, those who could hammer a piece of iron into a square and smooth surface were already the best blacksmiths. To hammer a 5-foot-long piece of iron into a uniform arc? What kind of superb skill was that? Then, he would use the same method to make 9 more of these things. Any craftsman in the city of Evernight would laugh at his ignorance. If they were all exquisite works of art, it would be fine. However, their grayish-black appearance and the way they were stacked indicated that they were not expensive and lightweight products. Since they appeared in the military camp with the reinforcements, it was very likely that they were some kind of special weapon. However, these weapons, which were supposed to be sturdy and durable, showed a beauty no less than that of a work of art. This strong conflict shocked him indescribably. Tang En swallowed and realized that he might not be able to call himself knowledgeable anymore. For this group of people, war had probably become something else. Chapter 890. On the other hand, in the central tent of the Northern Army, everyone was busy preparing for the upcoming battle. Leave the entire battlefield to the witches. After listening to Edith's arrangement, Eagle Face looked surprised. It's not that I don't believe in their ability, but there are at least 10,000 people in the Kingdom of Dawn, and many of them are wearing God's stones of retaliation. If they face the enemy head-on, the witches are likely to fall into a bitter battle. At that time, even if we want to save them, I'm afraid we won't be able to. I thought so too at first. Edith smiled. In fact, this plan didn't come from the advisor department, but from His Majesty. Do you have an official record? The deputy battalion commander asked. Here it is. The Pearl of the Northern Region handed him a secret letter marked in red. By the way, at the end of the letter, I'm granted the temporary authority to act as the commander. According to the rules of the First Army, the pre-war strategy of any military operation must be recorded in paper and reviewed and signed by the corresponding staff officers. If the signature was His Majesty, it meant that all troops had to carry out the plan unconditionally. After confirming that there was no mistake, Eagle Face immediately raised his head and saluted. The Northern Region garrison will complete the task. Very good. Edith raised the corner of her mouth. But you have to remember one thing. Your goal is to give the fleeing enemy a devastating blow, and the key is the word, fleeing. If the precondition doesn't exist, the operation will be regarded as a failure. All the ambushers will return to Cloud Ladder according to the original route and are not allowed to meet the enemy without permission. Please make this clear to everyone. Do you mean, retreat? Eagle Face asked in surprise. Does His Majesty not know whether his method will work? Who knows if we haven't tried it before? The Pearl of the Northern Region said bluntly. If this method doesn't work, we'll have to consider other methods. His Majesty sent me here just in case. What about the witches? Even if it fails, they won't be in any danger. I see. I'll go prepare now. All the squads can set off tomorrow morning. Eagle Face saluted again. This operation will be codenamed Operation Bomber. When you're in position, the battle will officially begin. Edith returned a military salute. Go. Yes. Although he did not know what a bomber was, Eagle Face felt a little more confident. Since His Majesty called it a machine, it must be extraordinary. Wasn't the steam engine an excellent example? 2 days later, in the early morning, Lightning finally received the departure order in the camp. Maggie has moved all the people in place. You can go now. Sylvie's voice came from the sigil of listening in her hand. The army of the Kingdom of Dawn is gathering. I hope you can catch up. Don't worry, we'll be there soon. After saying that, the little girl waved at Maggie and Hummingbird. Come here, we have to go. In the past 2 days, Not only had she checked the map of the cloud ladder from the air, she had also taken a look at the general situation of the surrounding areas. His Majesty's plan was not complicated. There were 6 witches in total, and they were divided into 2 groups according to the battle plan. One group was responsible for transportation and logistics, and its core ability was Maggie's magic. Arkansas Sivir and Lily were also on board. The former was to ensure that the enemy would discover them first and fire at them first, while the latter was to deal with the demonic plague created by the church. If the army of the Kingdom of Dawn broke into the Old Holy City, it was hard to guarantee that the church would not risk everything and release a large number of pathogens in the city. The other group was the core of this operation. Whoa! Coo! Hummingbird sat on the frame and held the connecting rods on both sides, allowing magic power to flow continuously on the rods. After a while, the iron frame, which His Majesty called East Wind, and the 9 bombs, were reduced to about 1% of its original weight, which was also the limit of Maggie's capacity after her mutation. Then the white-haired girl transformed into a giant beast and crouched on the frame. Lightning fastened the cloth and ropes, and the East Wind and Maggie immediately became one. Since Hummingbird's ability couldn't work on living things, Maggie's weight was basically equivalent to that of a witch plus a portable bomb rack of the same weight as the witch. As long as the weight reduction effect could be maintained, she could carry out precision strike missions in the air for a long time. This was also the improvement made by Roland after he used the hydrogen balloon bombing tactic to attack King's City. Compared with a balloon, Maggie's flying speed was much faster, and she was more flexible when carrying out missions. If they used dives to drop the bombs, Lightning would not have to adjust the speed, and the latter would have enough energy to carry out reconnaissance and guidance work. Of course, Hummingbird's magic power could not support the East Wind for a whole day. Although her magic power had increased a lot due to the training of the carrier artillery, it was already very good for her to be able to carry such a huge and heavy bomb for half a day. After all, the bomb body, guide head, and charge were usually transported separately. Fortunately, for the army of the Kingdom of Dawn, which was close at hand, half a day was enough. All roads are clear. Take off. I repeat, take off. Lightning pulled down her goggles and leaped into the air. Ah, again. Hummingbird covered her forehead and sighed. Ow, ow, ow. When Maggie flapped her wide wings, a huge shadow seemed to rise from the ground. The tents in the camp swayed left and right in the airwaves, as if a gale had passed through. Then she adjusted her direction and flew toward the foot of Mount Hermes. An hour later, the 3 of them successfully flew over the Old Holy City and easily found the target of this operation. The large army of tens of thousands of soldiers was very eye-catching even from a high altitude. From afar, this army looked like an overflowing stream. At the rear, they could barely maintain their formation, but when they arrived in the city, they were completely scattered. Countless colorful spots were slowly wriggling like ants, nibbling away at the territory of the Old Holy City bit by bit. Lightning did not like the church at all. She could only say that it was karma for them to suffer such a disaster. However, in addition to the believers, there were also many innocent people in the city, especially the orphans who were kidnapped by the church from all over the world and were still locked up in several monasteries. They should not be buried here with the Old Holy City. The little girl took a deep breath and kept rising until she felt a little difficult to breathe. Then she opened her arms and began to dive along the middle of the stream, but in the opposite direction. The rapid fall made her feel as if her internal organs were moving backward. This process should not be very pleasant, but it gave her a kind of pleasure as if she was flying as fast as lightning. Lightning did not look back. She knew that Maggie must be behind her. After years of living together, they had a seamless cooperation. The number of people and objects on the ground was increasing rapidly. Some Night apparently also noticed the dark shadow falling from the sky. Lightning could even faintly see the fear on their faces. When the human and the beast flew to the middle of the crowd, Lightning suddenly pulled herself up and shouted, "Now, drop the bomb." Chapter 891. With a click, the bolt popped up and the bomb, which weighed 5 times as much as Nightingale, slid out of the bracket and flew toward the crowd. After leaving the east wind, the bomb immediately regained its weight, but its speed did not decrease. This change instantly gave it great kinetic energy. The friction between the projectile and the air made a strange whistling sound, like a whistle, but also like the mountain wind passing through a cave. The people on the ground raised their heads at the same time, watching this incredible scene. At this moment, most of the nobles of the Kingdom of Dawn were relieved. Compared to Maggie's terrifying and huge body, the 2 bombs were not even worth mentioning. Even if they were thrown from such a height and hit their heads, there would be nothing left of them, but only 3 or 4 unlucky people would die. In order to get a share of the loot from the collapsing church, many responded to this expedition. From the Guardian Duke to the newly promoted knight, all of them prepared their horses and recruited followers. They followed the King of Dawn and marched westward. Therefore, the troop was unprecedentedly large. It was an army of more than 10,000 people. Even 30 or 40 of them died, let alone 3 or 4. The devil beasts, on the other hand, were even more frightening. Once they pounced into the crowd, they would bite and trample, causing at least hundreds of casualties, not to mention the losses caused by the ignorant serfs who were scared out of their wits and frantically fled. As long as the giant beasts did not land, they were not too worried. Of course, it could also be that the enemy was afraid to openly confront the army of the Kingdom of Dawn. After all, it was very likely that the witches were behind this. Besides the god's stone of retaliation, they had also prepared a lot of tools to deal with witches. Since the target of the robbery was the church, these tools were naturally indispensable. Many knights had put down their longbows and put away their god's stone arrows. They were betting on which family's troop the 2 black stones would fall on. There was no evacuation, no crouching. Under everyone's gaze, the 2 missiles were like arrows that left the bow, crashing head-on into the slow-moving army in a nearly straight-line trajectory. 2 scarlet flames suddenly appeared in the middle of the stream. The people and animals at the landing point of the bombs were directly turned into ashes. The expanding airflow formed an explosive wind, which spread in all directions like a ripple. At this speed, the hot wind was no different from a steel wall. Those who crashed into it were immediately smashed into pieces, with broken limbs and internal organs flying everywhere. The shockwave weakened very quickly, and after 100 steps, it no longer had the ability to tear apart the body. However, for a missile, its destructive power was far more than that. Different from the battle in the King's City, the area between the Kingdom of Dawn and the Old Holy City was a spacious plain. Neither the shock wave nor the shrapnel could block it. The high-density crowd, who were completely defenseless and standing upright, became the best target for the shrapnel. The thousands of iron balls in the shell, together with the broken shell, pierced through the crowd at a speed several times faster than the speed of sound. One iron ball could penetrate more than 10 people before stopping, not to mention the steel shell that was full of energy. The bomb's power was almost unreservedly. From the sky, the rising black smoke looked like a high wall that stopped the surging stream. However, before the nobles of the Kingdom of Dawn could recover from the shock, lightning had climbed to the highest point and started the second round of dives. East wind, attack again. Maggie followed closely behind. She folded her wings and dove down along the track created by lightning. She let out a long and sonorous howl. Ow! 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 8 bombs were mounted on 2 mounts on the left and right respectively and dropped according to the slide. They could be used 4 times in a row, or they could be dropped on the same target in one go. To achieve the best deterrent effect, lightning intended to dive 4 times and try to drop the bombs in the back of the stream that had not yet dispersed. However, when the third round of bombs dropped, the army of the Kingdom of Dawn collapsed. For those who were still alive, it was not an explosion but a divine punishment. Everywhere hit by the heavenly thunder was scorched earth and corpses were everywhere. Whether it was the unarmored serfs or the heavily armored knight, they were no different in front of the hellish flames. No one knew how long this attack would last. The deafening explosions and the screams of the seriously injured were torturing the nobles' nerves. What was most unacceptable was that in the face of such an incredible attack, the only thing they could do was to pray that the black stones would not fall near them next time. The giant beasts hovering and diving in the air would not get close to the attack range of the arrows. The nobles could only passively take the hits and were almost helpless. Such a battle was completely beyond their common sense. The nobles came to plunder wealth. If they could not even save their own lives, what was the use of money? Even if they could loot a large box of golden dragon, they could not transport it back after all the servants died. After weighing the two factors, the conclusion was self-evident. When the knight, who strictly ordered the serfs not to escape from the battlefield, turned around and spurred his horse, the nobles soon lost their restraint. The stream began to flow again, but this time in a completely different direction. First, there were two batches, then groups. The scattered nobles who had already entered the city lost their source, and the more orderly troops at the back became a pile of scattered sand. But for the army of the Kingdom of Dawn, the nightmare had just begun. The first army, who had been hiding in the field on the side of the road, calmly pulled the trigger when the enemies swarmed in. This was a textbook attack from the side. The nobles only wanted to leave this dangerous place as soon as possible, so they completely ignored the reconnaissance and defense of the flanks. The 5 squads of the northern region garrison lined up along the road and fired at the fleeing crowd. They did not need to worry about hitting the target with heavy machine guns or revolving rifles. Within a distance of less than 300 meters, they only needed to use up the bullets in the barrels as soon as possible. The straw, which was half a man's height, became the best cover for the ambushers. Before dawn, Eagle Face had already led his men to hide here. Sylvie's powerful insight ensured that she was completely hidden from the scouts. The scouts were almost like blind men, but their every move was clearly exposed to the eyes of the First Army. In terms of reconnaissance, the two were no longer on the same level. It was not until the first gunshot that the nobles of the Kingdom of Dawn realized that there was an enemy ambush in the rice field. If they were ambushed during the march, they might have launched a counterattack by relying on their superior numbers. But at this moment, escaping was the most important thing. Whether they would be shot or not depended on luck. Everyone hated that they didn't have an extra pair of legs. They ran away in panic. The nobles even drove their mounts to charge through the crowd, completely disregarding the lives of their subjects. Chapter 892. Twain, who had been forced to follow the First Army, found that he had underestimated the First Army's strength. From the beginning to the end of the battle, the two sides had not even touched each other. Uncle Sang and his men just kept firing at the troops of the Kingdom of Dawn. There was no overwhelming rain of arrows, no sweat, and no blood. Twain could see nothing in the battle line, which was more than a kilometer long. However, from time to time, the troops of the Kingdom of Dawn fell in groups, as if they were cooperating with the First Army. This made the battle look like a child's play, like an empty drama. However, from the screams coming from the side of the road, Twain knew that it was just an illusion. The more relaxed the First Army was, the more powerful they were. He finally understood what Nail meant by the fighting style of the First Army. A troop of hundreds of soldiers acted like a single person. When they were silent, they were like ghosts. When they attacked, they were also silent. Everything was carried out according to the plan. Their discipline was unprecedented. Compared to the lethal weapons, Tang En felt that the northern garrison was not much inferior. Under the cover of the night, they had set up an ambush before dawn, all 5 platoons had gone into battle, and there was not a single supervising team behind them, as the commander, Eagle Face, did not stay in the camp but stayed in the ambush circle closest to the old holy city. Everyone was highly focused and had a clear division of labor. Every order was executed quickly. If it were not for these details, even if they had fierce weapons, they would not have been able to achieve such results. After witnessing the whole battle, Twain could not help but feel lucky that he had chosen to leave Hermes in time. If he had stayed in the holy city and waited for the First Army to invade the city, a businessman like him would have been punished as a sponsor of the enemy. Well, he sighed secretly. It was too dangerous outside. If he could go back safely this time, he might as well do business in the city of Evernight. Although he did not have much money, it should not be a problem to feed his family. Fuer in the paradise on earth should also miss him very much. Twain thought, I really hope I can get home earlier. In the evening, Eagle Face walked into the temporary tent and saluted Edith. Then he handed her a booklet and said, the battlefield has been preliminarily cleaned. This is the report of each squad. I've summarized it. Thank you for your hard work. The Pearl of the Northern Region took the booklet and flipped through it. It was expected that the First Army had no casualties, but the Kingdom of Dawn had found more than 1,000 corpses and more than 600 wounded, which meant that the First Army had lost about 20% of its soldiers. Not many of them were killed by bullets. Most of them were killed by aerial bombardment and trampling on each other. The strafing along the way only exacerbated the chaos. This was also in line with the General Staff's deduction. After all, the number of soldiers stationed in the north was too small. It was impossible to transport enough ammunition by relying on the magic arc alone. Coupled with the fact that they lacked the means to pursue and attack, it was expected that more than half of the enemies would escape. As long as the task of driving away the army of the Kingdom of Dawn was accomplished, it would be considered a successful battle. In the end, more than 1,800 people abandoned their weapons and surrendered. Among them, 25 were nobles, and the one with the highest rank was a count who called himself the Lord of 100 Flowers. But what piqued Edith's interest was another baron called Raymond Peyton. According to the report, he repeatedly emphasized that he was an old acquaintance of a high-ranking official of the Kingdom of Greycastle and a friend of the King of Greycastle, even though he promised to pay the ransom and requested to be treated well. Did he really say that? She shook the booklet at Eagle Face. I guess he's just talking nonsense. Or maybe he thinks that the King of Greycastle is still Timothy Wimbledon. The deputy battalion commander frowned. What do you plan to do with these surrendered nobles? It's impossible to ransom them. Throw them into prison for now. Edith pondered for a moment. Maybe they'll be useful in the future. As for the non-nobles, just dismiss them on the spot. We don't have enough food to give them. Yes. Did you find the whereabouts of the King of Dawn, Appen Moya? No one with his characteristics was found among the corpses. Eagle Face shook his head. When we interrogated the captives, someone seemed to have seen Appen. But at that time, he and a group of knights seemed to have changed their clothes and didn't carry any flags or family emblems. The others wanted to retreat with them, but they were stopped by the knight. Because of the long distance and the chaos, the guy couldn't be sure that the other party was Appen. Where did they meet? In the old holy city. Then it's most likely him. Edith shrugged. To gather such a large army, the king is indispensable. If the king is in the army, where do you think he should go? The front? Eagle Face said uncertainly. To be precise, the back of the vanguard, she explained. There are no walls in the old holy city, so it's all about speed. So when it comes to plundering, the king should be the first to do it. His knight regiment is usually the vanguard, so they can eliminate the threat in advance and ensure that they are the first to enter the city. So when the bomber operation began, they were already in the city? Yes. Because of this, Appen escaped the air attack of Maggie and Miss Hummingbird, and had enough time to identify the situation and choose the right direction to escape. That being said, it's a good decision to put down the king's dignity and escape in disguise within an hour. Edith raised the corner of her mouth imperceptibly and licked her lips gently. Damn it! We let the biggest fish escape. Eagle Face said angrily. If I could prepare a pursuing force in advance. It's no use, she interrupted. On such a wide plain, unless you can predict his escape route, it's impossible to intercept him. The ambush on the main road just took advantage of the enemy's habit of retreating and herd mentality. So when they fled to the wheat field on the other side, the killing effect of the flintlock was greatly reduced. The deputy battalion commander did not refute, but still looked very upset. You don't have to blame yourself. You know, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Edith smiled. Why? Eagle Face looked up in surprise. It's complicated to explain. You just need to understand that fear is contagious. When those people realize how terrible it is to be the enemy of Grey Castle, will they still ignore His Majesty's warning? The Pearl of the Northern Region paused. I'm afraid that Appenmoya's throne won't be so easy to sit on. Seeing that she did not want to talk about it further, Eagle Face did not ask further. So what should we do next? Occupy the Old Holy City directly. Chapter 893. When Isabella saw the familiar city again, she could not help but feel a little emotional. She did not expect that in just over a year, the Church had changed from the only hope for mankind to defeat the demons to an obstacle in the battle of divine will. Although she had lived here for a long time, she did not have much affection for the Church. His Holiness O'Brien's daily teaching made her understand that the result was always more important than the process. If the demons could not be stopped, all the gains and losses would be meaningless. She carried out this teaching and chose Zero, who was more promising than Archbishop Maine. After Zero was defeated, she joined Roland Wimbledon. If there was a leader with more potential than Roland, she would still make the same choice. Because it was righteous. Compared to personal interests, she put the continuation of the human race first. Having said that, Isabella still had some regrets in her heart. She just couldn't figure out what went wrong for the time being. She did not understand until she returned to the Old Holy City. She was feeling sorry for Zero. As a pure witch who had lived for a long time, Zero should have been able to keep a distance from her. Many pure witches had secretly complained about the moodiness of the Heart Snatcher, but surprisingly, Zero felt that she was inexplicably easy to get along with. Compared to those pure witches who had their own selfish motives and other demands in the battle of divine will, Zero's thoughts were simply undisguised, and her beliefs were far beyond those of others. Isabella found that in fact, Zero was not much different from her. The only difference was that she was more used to standing in the position of an assistant, while Zero was more like a leader. This probably had nothing to do with nature. It was just an inevitable choice for Zero after living for more than 200 years. If Isabella had met Roland 10 years earlier, the Holy City would not have become what it was today. Unfortunately, it all happened a little too late. After circling twice, Maggie landed steadily in the camp outside the city. We're here. Let's go down, Agatha said from behind. Isabella nodded and jumped down from the giant beast. Soldiers immediately came to greet them. Lady Edith is already waiting in the tent. Please follow me. In addition to her, His Majesty had also asked Maggie to bring along the Ice Witch and bluntly told her that she was still serving her sentence and needed to move under the supervision of the other witches. Isabella did not mind such a straightforward statement at all. She was not wearing the god's locket of retribution, nor was she shackled. Even her clothes were brand new, which was a privilege she had not expected. Walking into the tent, a woman smiled and stood up from behind the table. I'm Edith Kant, a member of the Department of Defense, and also the temporary person in charge of the battle against the Holy City. A handsome mortal, thought Isabella. I thought you would control the Hermes Plateau first, and then go west to recover the Old Holy City. That was the plan, but the people of the Kingdom of Dawn came a little too soon. Edith roughly explained the situation. His Majesty ordered us to ensure the safety of the cloisters, which is not a problem. The difficult part is how to safely and orderly transfer the orphans out. If I remember correctly, they all received education from the Church, right? If we forcibly drive them out, I'm afraid it will backfire, so I thought you might have a way. After all, before the battle, His Majesty specifically assigned this task to you. Isabella could not help but frown. Wait, you came here through the cloud ladder? Why? Is there something wrong? That's the main road that the Church keeps a close eye on. According to reason, there should be someone guarding it. Is that so? Edith also lowered her voice. But the merchants think it's a secret passage that few people know about, and Sylvie didn't find anything strange. The Church has been operating here for hundreds of years, and they know every grass and stone very well. How could they let go of such a small passage that is not controlled by the city wall? Isabella shook her head. Allowing the smugglers to pass through is just a deliberate act. It was originally prepared to deal with the allied forces of the Four Kingdoms during the months of demons. Its sentry points are all set in the natural karst caves among the mountains, so it's normal that it was overlooked. Could it be because of the collapse of the order in the Holy City? The cloud ladder is still on the outer city wall, so it's very difficult for such a situation to happen. Isabella was quite surprised. How is this the collapse of the order? It's almost like abandoning the city and escaping. If possible, it's better for me to go to Hermes and have a look in person. First, solve the problem in the cloisters, Agatha reminded. We should be able to see the situation in the cloisters from the air, right? Yes, Miss Lightning has checked all 3 main cloisters and found a big problem. The orphans inside seem to have been organized and are ready to defend the cloisters to death. This is one of the reasons why we haven't taken any action yet. Edith spread out her hands and said, I don't want my soldiers to defeat the army of the Kingdom of Dawn unscathed, only to lose their lives here. Organized? Isabella thought for a moment and said, let me go in and talk to them. You alone? She wanted to say that she alone was enough, but she swallowed the words when they were on the tip of her tongue. No, Agatha will come with me. Lady Isabella. Seeing Isabella, Maggie immediately stood up straight and subconsciously pressed her right hand to her chest. I've told you many times, don't use honorifics. Just call me by my name, she said expressionlessly. We're no longer pure witches. Yes, lady. Maggie nodded hurriedly. Isabella sighed inwardly. Although His Majesty had limited her actions, he did not restrict Maggie, Vanilla, and the others. Later, they would occasionally come to the Foreign Affairs building to talk to her about the latest news in the Witch Union. However, they still had the habit of living in the cloisters and had not completely changed. Fortunately, Agatha did not mind these details. Take us in. She pointed to the city not far away. Won't the First Army go? Maggie summoned the magic ark and looked at Edith, who was behind her to see them off. They won't enter the old holy city until safety is assured. The magic ark quickly sank into the ground, leaving only a transparent ceiling. Through the layer of soil above their heads, they could see Lightning, who was guiding them in the air. Although there were 4 cloisters in the old holy city, in fact, they were almost equivalent to one. They were built around the Reflection Church and were connected by underground passages. A secret passage led directly to the Privy Temple in the mountains, mainly to facilitate the transportation of new witches for the conversion ceremony. However, since the awakening of the extraordinary led to the burning of one of the cloisters, the connecting passage had been sealed. The magic ark quietly sneaked into the west cloisters, which was the closest to the outer circle. As Lightning had said, the huge courtyard was empty. 2 sallow and emaciated girls stood at the entrance of the lobby, holding long spears that were taller than them. Let's go up and send them here, Isabella said. Don't we sneak in and have a look first? Maggie asked in surprise. There are too many God's stones hidden inside. There's no need to take this risk. Large God's stones were often placed in important places like the cloisters, which could cover more than 100 steps, far beyond her range of elimination. The magic ark quickly jumped out of the ground, causing a panic among the guards. In their eyes, the 2 of them almost appeared in the courtyard out of nowhere. A sharp whistle immediately sounded, and the closed doors and windows were opened one after another. A group of orphans, led by a dozen nuns, swarmed out, holding swords, wooden shields, short bows, and crossbows, and rushed toward the 2. Agatha had already condensed ice in her hands. If the orphans shot, she would be able to wrap Isabella in it at any time. Wait! Everyone stop! Suddenly, the leading nun shouted loudly. Are you Lady Isabella who serves His Holiness? Another nun asked in a trembling voice. Following this question, everyone stopped in their tracks. That's me. Isabella nodded calmly. It seemed that they did not forget her. In this way, the task given by His Majesty could be completed successfully. However, the next reaction of the crowd caught her by surprise. "It's really Lady Isabella." "Great, we're saved." "No, it's Her Holiness Isabella." "Her Holiness, please save us." "Her Holiness, please don't leave us behind." Chapter 894. I'm not the Pope. His Holiness has. Isabella was about to deny, but Agatha patted her on the shoulder and stopped her. "The mission is more important. His Majesty won't mind." Isabella instantly understood the meaning behind the seemingly unrelated words. She also knew that this method was more convenient, but for a king who valued power, this was indeed a dangerous signal. Thinking of what she had seen and heard in Neverwinter, she hesitated for a moment and then took back her words. "What do you mean by saving you? Where are the Judgment Warriors and the priests?" "They ran away." "No, some of them were called away by the Holy City. We committed a crime and killed the priest. That's not her fault. No food, no clothes, no supplies for 2 whole months. Have we been abandoned? What nonsense are you talking about? Isn't His Holiness here?" Suddenly there was a lot of people talking at the same time. "Be quiet," Isabella said impatiently. "One person is enough." She glanced at the crowd and pointed to the nun who was the leader. "You first. Stand up and talk." "Yes, Your Holiness." The nun respectfully touched her head to the ground and then struggled to get up. "The last news I received from Hermes was more than a month ago." An hour later, Isabella finally had a general understanding of what had happened here. Since the battle in Coldwind Ridge, the supply of the cloister had been going from bad to worse. At first, the amount of food was reduced, but later, the number of meals was reduced by half. Since the 3 courtyards were closed, the news came from outside, so the order was relatively stable. The clergy and the Judgment Warriors who were stationed there encouraged everyone to pray hard and get through this difficult time with a strong attitude. They also said that the situation would get better soon. But it was not true. The so-called last news was that the church had transferred all the Judgment Army and priests away 1.5 months ago. The nuns did not know what order they had received. They only knew that the believers who had not been transferred away came out of the hall with ashen faces, as if they had lost their souls. After that, the cloister became a place of disaster. According to the principle of automatic replacement, they appointed themselves as the new priests, but they no longer led the people in prayer, nor were they willing to follow the strict rules set by their predecessors. Not only did they enjoy the small amount of food in the warehouse without restraint, but they also further reduced the orphans' meals. When the nun went to negotiate with them, she learned of an earth-shattering news, which was the collapse of the Hermes Cathedral. The church was on the brink of death. In order to fight the enemy to the death, the higher-ups decided to abandon the old holy city and transfer all the official personnel back to the plateau. The final order left to the monastery was to defend themselves against the invading enemies and dedicate their lives to God until the very last moment. Although these changes sounded unbelievable, the fact that the passage connecting to the Reflection Church was sealed seemed to prove their theory. Faced with this bad news, the nuns were divided into 2 groups. Some of them were completely disappointed and joined the new priests, while the others were hesitant and did not know what to do. According to the leading nun, the church was so powerful in the past that they hardly needed to think, and they had never considered their own fate. Because of this, the news almost completely threw them into chaos, as if the world they knew in the past suddenly collapsed. What broke the situation was that the new priests became even more aggressive. They were originally low-level believers, and their status in the cloister was only a little higher than that of the nuns. Usually, they were responsible for assisting the manager in managing the affairs of the cloister, and it was almost impossible for them to be promoted. The truly capable people would not be assigned to this place. Now that they had finally tasted the sweetness of power and lost the supervision of the higher-ups, things naturally got out of hand. For example, the blessing of the choir and the teacher's class. In fact, This kind of thing itself was illegal, but the management of the cloister in the holy city was not strict, so there were often big figures with special hobbies who came here to enjoy themselves. This was not a secret in the courtyard. It was not until the escape of the extraordinary that the church strengthened the supervision in this area. But now, they had no worries. The blessing changed from a single person to a forced obedience of the whole class, and even evolved into a trade of body for food. This not only completely violated the law of the church, but also pushed the hesitant nuns to the side of the orphans. Although these girls of different ages were all from the four kingdoms, they were taught to read and read books, and learned to sing and sing. After a long time, they were not without feelings. Coupled with the orders given by the church, the nuns began to resist the instructions of the new priests, and secretly took out the food from the warehouse to distribute to the starving children. But no matter how much they scrimped, they could not make food out of thin air. The food in the warehouse was getting less and less, and the priests also noticed the nuns' betrayal, and conflicts broke out. When they smuggled food, they caught and executed 2 nuns on the spot. This was intended to frighten the crowd, but it aroused the uneasiness of the rest of the nuns. After some planning and coordination, the leaders launched a counterattack one night. The priests, who were indulging in pleasure, were caught off guard. The orphans, who had an absolute advantage in numbers, worked together and captured them all. Not only that, but the leaders also contacted the other 2 cloisters through the tunnel and used the same method to deal with the ugly believers. Just when everyone tried to select a representative to cross the high wall of the courtyard and report the plight here to Hermes, the army of the Kingdom of Dawn appeared on the border of the old holy city. Since they had been abandoned, there was no other way but to resist. Everyone knew that once the enemy attacked the cloisters, even if they did not resist, they would not end well, so the scene that Isabella saw at the beginning. After listening to the statement of the nun, Isabella had a lot of doubts in her heart. She had also heard about the bad habits in the cloisters, and it was not surprising that the incompetent quickly became corrupt after obtaining power. What surprised her was the order announced by the church. To fight the enemy to the death. If so, it was impossible for them to abandon the outer wall and neglect the surveillance of the mountain trail. What was the difference between this and surrendering the first line of defense? Even if the holy city was really short of manpower to the extent that they could not even take care of the cloud ladder, it was impossible for them to say, abandon the old holy city. Because most people did not know the secrets of the church, but she knew clearly that neither the new holy city on the plateau nor the old city at the foot of the mountain was the core of the church. There was only one real core of the church, which was the pivotal mechanism hidden deep underground. Whether it was the mining of God's stones, the research on sigil of magic stones, or the transformation ceremony of the God's punishment army, they were all carried out in this secret mechanism which had been built 400 years ago. There was a secret passage leading to the pivotal temple in the old holy city, and even the main exit. How could such an important position be abandoned so easily? Chapter 895. Either the church was covering something up, or the nuns were lying. If it was the latter, Isabella could not think of any reason for them to fabricate an order. After all, it was a fact that they had been abandoned. Judging from the dispirited faces of these people, the cloister would become a place of death in another half a month. If it was the former, the church had recalled all the clergy to Hermes, but did not set up any defenses against the cloud ladder and the old holy city. What on earth did they want to do? Isabella temporarily suppressed the speculation in her mind and looked at the leader. What's your name? Your Holiness, my name is Autumn. Haven't you ever thought of escaping from here? What? The nun was stunned. Although the walls of this courtyard are high and the gate thick, it's not impossible to climb over. 1.5 months is enough for you to build a wooden ladder, or pile firewood under the gate to burn the door or melt the iron chains. All of these are feasible methods. Isabella asked curiously, since you've thought of sending a representative to report the situation, why didn't you choose to go out together? Even the food supply here has been cut off. Even without the army of the Kingdom of Dawn, staying here will only lead to death. After a long silence, Autumn murmured, but where can we go if we leave here? Her words made everyone present lower their heads. I've never left the cloister. Me neither. Although we don't have enough to eat, at least we can eat something every day. It's not much better outside, one of the orphans said. If we ask for food from others, we'll become the same as before. The book says that we shouldn't take begging for granted. I don't want to live like before. I see. Looking at the confused faces of the people, Isabella suddenly understood. They did not stay here because of the church's order, but because their living habits made it difficult for them to have other choices. This was a mixed message. It would be easy to deal with the nuns and kill those who were loyal to the holy city. However, if these orphans became die-hard believers of the church, His Majesty would have a headache. I also want to ask you a question. She took a deep breath and asked in a deep voice, Why do you call me Your Holiness? Well. Chiao looked timid. She hesitated for a while and said, His Holiness Maine has passed away, the 3 archbishops have passed away one after another, and Hermes has not issued a new appointment order. According to the principle of automatic replacement, you are the one closest to the temple. Lord Isabella, please save us. Don't leave us here. We are willing to accept any punishment. Please take us to Hermes. The nuns begged again. It seemed that the reason why they called her Your Majesty was not premeditated, but because they wanted to regain the attention of the sacred city, Isabella thought. Although the principle of replacement did not apply to the higher-ups of the church, those who had fallen into the water would not care about such details. As long as there was a chance of survival, they would grab it tightly, even if it was a straw. Thinking of this, she quickly came up with an idea. I'm here to tell you something important. Listen up. Everyone immediately held their breath. The church is no longer the church it used to be, Isabella said loudly. Maine is not the real pope. He not only betrayed Sir O'Brien but also stole the throne of the pope. In fact, Sir O'Brien wants someone else to succeed him. Her words were like a stone that caused 1,000 ripples, and the crowd suddenly burst into an uproar. That person is his first pure witch, 0. She did not know what His Majesty would think of these words, but since she had started, she decided to do her best. Greycastle is not the enemy of the church. To fight against a real strong enemy, Sir O'Brien even hopes to form an alliance with Greycastle. Do you mean, demonic beasts? Someone could not help but ask. More terrible than demonic beasts. Isabella shook her head. These are all recorded in the Holy Scriptures of the Church, and only a few people can see them. Maine was not willing to let the pure witches take away his power, so he secretly launched a rebellion and framed 0, who wanted to be an ambassador to Greycastle. That was how the Battle of Coldwind Ridge broke out. Fortunately, Maine's trick did not succeed. I survived the battle, but the masterminds of the rebellion all died within a month. There is no doubt that this is the punishment of God. So there was no battle to the death, and there was no need to stay in the cloister until the last moment. She paused. You are safe now. Both the nuns and the orphans showed a look of disbelief. Then, the punishment for the priests, they are not qualified to be called priests for what they did. I forgive you. The courtyard was silent for a moment, and then there was a huge burst of cheers. That's great, Your Holiness is merciful. Long live Her Holiness Isabella. Long live the Pope. Isabella pressed her hand down to calm everyone down. I've already said that I'm not the Pope, and the principle of replacement doesn't apply to the transfer of power. I'm just the representative of His Holiness, just like before. Then you also represent the Church of Hermes. Chiao said excitedly. So I have a task for you, Isabella said firmly. Of course, after you fill your stomachs. The crowd, who had finally stood up, knelt down in unison. Please tell us. She knew that these people did not support her because they believed what she said. They were the ones who had been abandoned. The door of fate had already been closed to them. Now that they had the hope of returning to the church, they were naturally willing to give everything, even if this church was not real. If the real Church of Hermes was still alive, they might think about whether their choice was right after they got out of trouble and calmed down. But now, this premise no longer existed. When the main force of the First Army arrived, everything she said would become a reality. She would break the old concept, make up a half-true story, and instill a new fact in them. In this way, His Majesty could really control this land. It's very simple. I need you to restore the order of the old holy city, Isabella said methodically. Chio, gather the people from the other 2 cloisters and pass my words to them. Then, before tonight, organize the distribution of rations for all the children. The First Army of Grey Castle will meet you. They've already known about the betrayal of Maine and the others, so they won't make things difficult for you. Next, you need to inform each family one by one. By the way, count who has left and who is still here. If you see any priests or followers of the traitor faction, inform me immediately. As Isabella issued her orders, the nuns quickly responded and then turned around to busy themselves. Although their situation was not substantially better than half an hour ago, at this moment, everyone's expression was completely different. The gate was quickly dismantled. When a nun and the children lined up to leave the cloister, one of them suddenly bowed deeply to her. Thank you, Lady Isabella. After that, every child did the same. You're so kind, Your Excellency. I won't forget you. This kind of voice almost ran through the whole line. Thank you. Isabella slightly closed her eyes. Ever since she became a pure witch, she had received a lot of hatred and curses, but this was the first time she heard gratitude. She did this not to thank them, but as a means to achieve her goal. For the same goal, she could kill these people without any scruples. So, this kind of gratitude was unnecessary for her. Although she thought so, she felt as if there was something else in her heart, a feeling that she had never felt before. It was slightly swollen and warm like light. She had thought that she would reject it, but surprisingly, this feeling was not that annoying. Was this His Majesty's goal? Chapter 896. 2 weeks later, at the end of the month of midsummer, Roland finally arrived in Hermes. The northern region garrison and the witches welcomed him at the gate of the holy city. He also saw a few nuns dressed in the church's black robes. Although Roland had heard the news from Lightning that the church's higher-ups had all disappeared, he still could not believe it when he walked into the empty fortress on the plateau. The fierce battle he had expected did not happen. Neither the gods' punishment witches nor the new mortars had been put to use. Although this result could not have been better, it still felt like punching cotton. Roland had made the right decision to bring Isabella with him. According to the reports from Eagle Face and Agatha, it was the former pure witch who had noticed the abnormality of the church. After taking care of the orphans in the cloister, she proposed to the Northern Region Army to investigate the holy city of Hermes. The result was surprising. The huge city had long been deserted, leaving only some residents in the outer city to maintain the illusion that the church still existed. In fact, they did not know what had happened in the inner city. They only heard that the church was preparing for the final battle. After that, the nuns led by Isabella quickly entered Hermes. Under the guidance of these nuns, the signs of people fleeing to the kingdom of Wolfheart and the kingdom of Everwinter were gradually alleviated. At the very least, there were no more groups of people fleeing to the kingdom of Wolfheart and the kingdom of Everwinter. After all, the sudden change of abandoning the holy city was too dramatic, and the damage to the church's reputation was almost devastating. Compared to those who left without saying goodbye, the nuns who took the initiative to restore order were more like the successors of the church. How did they do it? Since the letter could not be too detailed, the first thing Roland did after entering the holy city was to ask about the whereabouts of the remaining forces of the church. There are thousands of people in the inner city. Don't they need to pass through the outer city wall to leave the plateau? There are many natural tunnels under Hermes, some of which can pass through the city wall. If they evacuated in batches, the residents in the outer city would indeed not notice, Isabella explained. Isabella explained, when they were built, they were designed to be used once and only for exits. I checked several tunnel entrances and found that they had all been destroyed. Where do those tunnels lead to? Only the people who passed by know. She shook her head. If this escape was planned in advance, it would be difficult to track them after a month and a half. So the church was planning to cut off their tail to save their lives and make a comeback. Roland could not help but frown. The problem was that abandoning the holy city was equivalent to abandoning the foundation. It was not as simple as cutting off one's tail. The loss was even more severe than cutting off one's head. Were they that confident that they could find another base to fight against Grey Castle? Or were they planning to break up and harass his territory in batches? The thought of having to be wary of these fanatics in the next few years gave him a headache. Isabella probably saw through his thoughts and smiled. You don't have to worry about the church anymore, they won't be coming back. Roland was stunned. Why do you say that? They left a messenger behind, the other party replied. In a small church in the northern district of the Holy City, Roland met the messenger that Isabella mentioned. It was a white-haired old man wearing a brand new red priest robe with golden edges. He held a thick book in his arms as he walked out under the escort of the guards. Although his steps were a little weak, he still held his head high as if he did not want to lose to anyone in terms of momentum. He first glanced at Isabella coldly, then looked at Roland. Are you the king of Grey Castle, His Majesty Roland Wimbledon? That's me. Grey hair and grey eyes, you really look like your father, the old man said slowly. My name is Jacob, the high priest of the Holy City. According to the secular classification, I'm probably equivalent to a duke. Of course, I don't have the corresponding fief, nor do I need that many servants. I heard that you insisted on waiting for me here. Roland shrugged. Why, when those people sneaked away, they didn't take you with them? I wanted to stay. He looked solemn as if he was saying his last words. I'm old and can't run anymore. Even if I can walk, I don't have many years to live. Instead of living a new life, it's better to be buried with this city. New life? Roland quickly caught the keywords in Jacob's words. That's right. Let go of all responsibilities and live the rest of your life in peace. There was a hint of sarcasm in Jacob's voice. You've won, Your Majesty. If this is the result you want to see, the church will no longer oppose you. This city will be handed over to you untouched, and you will soon take over our nightmare. Oh. Roland said noncommittally. Why do you think we're guarding this empty plateau? He raised his voice a little. Look at what you've done. The human race is going to be destroyed because of you. Really? That's a little too serious. I'm not going to take the blame. Hearing this, Roland roughly understood the high priest's intention. The church really didn't want to let him conquer the holy city easily. Even if they couldn't stop him physically, they still wanted to hinder him spiritually. Zero had also played this trick before the final battle, but the original intention was completely different. If he knew nothing about the Battle of Divine Will, he would definitely be so surprised that he could not close his mouth when he heard the news that the demons would soon destroy the human race. If he added oil to the fire and put the classic blame of, the destruction of the human race is all your fault, on him, the lethality would be no less than spiritual pollution. Blame? Ha, nonsense. Do you think I'm joking? Young Your Majesty, it seems that the pure witch didn't tell you the truth. Jacob cast a meaningful glance at Isabella. The church is shouldering an unimaginable responsibility, and only a few high-level people know about it. You have no idea what kind of enemy we've been preparing to face for the past hundreds of years. Now that you've ruined everything, you naturally have to bear the consequences. It's useless even if you're unwilling. When fate befalls the human race, all you can do is helplessly accept it and watch your kingdom turn into a sea of fire. It seemed that this guy not only wanted to launch a spiritual attack but also wanted to sow discord between him and Isabella. Unfortunately, he misjudged me and expressed the wrong intention. Looking at the old priest who was speaking righteously, Roland could not help but think of a saying, life is like a play, it all depends on acting. You can choose not to believe me, but the truth is unquestionable. Jacob let out a long sigh and opened the book in his arms and handed it to Roland. This is the Holy Bible of the Church. After reading it, you'll understand what you've done. No, I should say the real enemy of the human race is demons, right? Roland interrupted him casually. The Church didn't build the holy city here to defend against demonic beasts, but for the God's stone mine in the mountains. There's a privy council under the cathedral, which is used to mine God's stone and transform the God's punishment army. This is the core of the Church. Of course, I don't know if you know this. After all, only the Pope can control the transformation ceremony. Do you want to talk about the battle of divine will or the God's smile? A cycle of war every 400 years wasn't anything new. Devils weren't phantoms that could come and go without a trace. In fact, I'd dealt with them a long time ago. So, what else do you want to say? Jacob was stunned. He opened his mouth and stammered for a long time, looking as if he would pass out at any time. After a while, he pointed at Isabella, trembling. It's you. Isabella shook her head gently. I didn't tell him this. From the very beginning, he knew far more than we expected. You've underestimated him, or rather, we've all underestimated him. Chapter 897. As there were soldiers of the First Army in the church, Roland did not talk about the origin of the Battle of Divine Will. He only briefly told him the history of how the Witch Empire turned into the church. But this information alone was enough to shock the high priest. Every time Roland mentioned the internal secrets of the church, Jacob's eyes would widen until they were almost as big as lanterns. He looked like he wanted to refute, but he could only stammer. Obviously, some of the information was beyond his understanding, but it coincided with the various rumors in the church. Seeing the old priest gasping for breath, Roland temporarily stopped. He did not stop because he had nothing to say, but he was worried that the old priest would die of anger if he continued. Although there was nothing wrong with that, Roland was not satisfied yet. When Jacob caught his breath, Roland continued, "It seems that you don't know much about the nature of the church. Otherwise, you wouldn't be so shocked. You obviously wanted to scold me for talking nonsense, but you found out that there are unquestionable clues. I think everything about the demons and the Battle of Divine Will was passed down from the Pope generation after generation, so that this goal, or belief would not be forgotten. However, those who usurped power are naturally afraid of witches. They don't even dare to mention the past 400 years, let alone the last wish of the first Pope. They keep saying that they want to fight for humanity, but how many believers in the entire holy city of Hermes know about this? Unfortunately, the kingdom of Greycastle is different. In the western region of Neverwinter, this kind of information isn't a secret. All of my ministers know about the existence of demons, and the plan to fight against the Battle of Divine Will is also written in the policy outline. From farmers to blacksmiths, all of my subjects are fighting for it. This is the biggest difference between me and you. You can say that as early as a few years ago, I have been preparing to fight against the end of the human race." Roland looked at the old priest's livid face with great interest. "The church is the only savior of mankind? You think too highly of yourselves. Regardless of whether I can defeat this powerful enemy, at least I'm sure of one thing." He walked up to the old priest and said word by word, "The church can't even defeat me, so how can it have the confidence to save the human race? Stop your wishful thinking." Jacob's expression suddenly froze, and then his face quickly turned from green to white, as if there were thousands of words that could not be as lethal as this one. Clearly, it was not that he had not considered such a problem, but he had been deceiving himself and ignoring it. Now that it was suddenly exposed, his last bit of persistence also collapsed. The old shaman slowly collapsed to the ground, no longer as solemn and arrogant as when he first appeared. "Take him back to prison." Roland waved his hand. "It's useless to send him to the mines at this age. Let him live well. When the bloody moon comes, let him see with his own eyes how the people of Greycastle fight against the demons. I hope at that moment, he will still remember how to repent to the gods." "Yes, your majesty." The soldier lifted Jacob up by force, clamped his arm, and retreated. Also, you did a good job. Roland looked at Isabella. If it weren't for you, the holy city wouldn't have restored order so quickly. Isabella averted her eyes and said a little hurriedly, You don't mind at all? In the name of the Pope's agent, I issued an order to unify those abandoned people. Roland had learned from the reports of Edith, Eagle-Face, and Isabella about fabricating a new history and completely dividing the church into two. Among them, the Pearl of the Northern region highly praised the idea. She believed that this would not only bring the old and the new holy city under the control of Grey Castle, but also completely absorb the influence of the church that had accumulated for hundreds of years. Even if those fugitives set up a new church, compared to Roland, who actually controlled Hermes, even if it was true, it would still be somewhat false. Roland was more realistic. This plateau was located in the center of the impassable mountain range, opposite to the Big Breach, which was a strategic place that must be defended in the Battle of Divine Will. Originally, he had planned to attack Hermes with the intention of replacing them. Now that he could make use of the existing manpower and thereby save some money, it was naturally a good thing. If it turns out to be effective, why should I mind? He smiled. But even so, you still have to serve your sentence. I've never thought about that. Isabella hurriedly said. Of course, you can't go without a reward. He waved his hand. In the future, if you need to appear as an agent, you can enjoy the treatment that befits your status. How about that? The treatment of an agent? In layman's terms, it should be the Prime Minister or the hand of the King, Roland said with a smile. Of course, it doesn't include the position and power. It's just simple food, accommodation, and transportation. For example, spacious luxury suites, delicious food provided by the royal chef, and chaos drinks that you can drink until you're full. If you don't want these, you can also exchange them for the Golden Dragon reward. No, Your Majesty, Isabella shook her head. The former is fine. I mean, please do as you say. Well, then it's decided, he said cheerfully. As the main force of the First Army joined the search operation, details of this strange city gradually appeared in front of Roland. He was surprised to find that what the old priest said was intact was not an exaggeration. Except for the collapsed Hermes Cathedral, the other buildings were basically intact. The broken parts of the city wall had been repaired, and the catapults erected on it were also preserved. The large number of berserker pills Isabella mentioned were also quietly stored in the secret underground cellar. After counting, there were more than 420,000 pills in total. Thinking of Zero's plan to use millions of berserker soldiers to fight the demons to the death, Roland was glad that she had not taken this step. After counting the number, a big fire was lit on the 10,000-meter-tall city wall and burned all the pills. The remaining residue was pushed down the wall and consolidated with the permafrost soil. At this point, the spreading of the berserker army, which had worried him so much, had finally come to an end. However, the results of the search report were far more than that. For example, food. For example, weapons. New supplies were found every day, and the number of them was enough to arm several knight regiments of King's City. No wonder Apen Moya, the King of Dawn, and his vassals could not hold back and came all the way here to rob them. Roland found that, except for the gold royals and the jewelry, the top echelons of the church did not take any strategic materials with them when they evacuated. This also confirmed the statement that they would not come back after this trip. They were simply going to live a carefree life after dividing the family property. The behemoth that had occupied the northwest side of Grey Castle had finally disappeared and the dust had settled. Roland was also free. What he needed to do next was to wait for Iron Axe to clear the eastern region, and then lead the army to converge on the border of the neighboring country. Together with the main force, they would launch a two-pronged attack on the Kingdom of Dawn. Since it was rare for him to relax, he planned to take a good look at this territory that had been managed by the church for hundreds of years. After all, in the memory fragments, the holy city of Hermes was not complete. Chapter 898. In a sense, the Reflection Church was not only the place for the succession of popes, but also a museum. Just the bust of the church leaders displayed inside was of great historical significance, not to mention the sigil of magic stones that could record important events in history through holographic images. If it became a tourist attraction in the future, the tickets would definitely be sold like hotcakes. However, if Roland wanted to go in now, he would have to spend a lot of effort. Although the Reflection Church was under the old Holy City Church and was arranged in a mirror, the two were not connected. The stone slabs and clay in the middle were more than 10 meters thick, and they were filled with God's stones of retaliation. It would be very troublesome to dig through them manually or use the magic arc to go through them. After asking Isabella for details, he decided to enter through the tunnel under the cloister. After all, these tunnels used to be unimpeded. Although they were later destroyed and blocked, it was not a big problem for the magic Arkansas. More importantly, the abandoned tunnels would not be affected by God's stones. Compared to the pivotal mechanism, which was shrouded in God's stone veins, the former was naturally much safer. In addition, to avoid getting lost, he asked Sylvie to scan the area in advance to determine the best route for this sightseeing trip. Because of these preparations, the witches also heard the news. On the day of departure, Roland found a group of people gathered outside the tent, among which the little girl Lightning was the most excited. "Your Majesty, how could you not call me for such an important adventure?" She pouted as if she had been greatly wronged. "Am I not your chief explorer?" "Coo coo coo. Adventure coo," Maggie said in support of her. This is just a sightseeing trip. It's the place for the succession of the Pope. There's no danger to speak of." "Then I want to go too." "Can I?" the little girl asked with her watery eyes. He could not refuse at all. Since there was a first, there would naturally be a second. "Your Majesty, take me with you," Hummingbird whispered. "I can help you with your luggage." As a member of the Quest Society, how can I miss such a crucial moment? "Am I right, Your Majesty?" The one who spoke was Agatha. "I also want to go where Sister Anna is going." A crisp voice came from Nana. "It would be troublesome if there is a demonic plague infected being stored in this underground building. Didn't you say that places with poor ventilation are the easiest places to breed the plague?" Lily said in a deadpan manner. "If it's the Queen of Starfall City, I'd like to see her again." Not only the witches but also number 76 Phyllis came over. "Wait, isn't she an enemy of your tequila?" Roland asked curiously. "But she's also a respectable leader. Without Lady Alice, we wouldn't have been able to hold on until the divergence occurred." In the end, almost everyone got on the free ride to the Reflection Church, just as they had wished. Originally, Roland had only planned to take Anna, Nightingale, Sylvie, and Isabella with him. However, due to the large increase in the number of participants, Maggie had to carry them back and forth several times to bring them all into the abandoned tunnels. Although these complicated tunnels had been sealed for a long time, they were still intact. There was no sign of water seepage or plant root erosion. Apart from the dust, it was very smooth to walk through. After walking for about a quarter of an hour, the group successfully arrived at the upper area of the Reflection Church. With Isabella leading the way, the group soon came to a magnificent hall. It was magnificent not because it was spacious, but because the dome was so huge that they could not see the end of it. On both sides of the door stood a row of thick stone pillars, which were also straight and hidden in the darkness. In other words, its height was much higher than its width. As soon as Roland walked into the hall, he immediately felt a strong sense of constraint, as if he was walking on a cliff. Although there were stones of lighting on both sides of the wall, the weak yellow light was only enough to illuminate a very small area at the bottom. "This is the prayer room. The portraits of the previous popes are hung on the wall of the hall," Isabella explained while walking. Isabella explained as they walked. On the day of the handover, O'Brien brought Maine here, but the Archbishop did not expect O'Brien to bring another person with him. "That person was Zero," Roland said in a low voice. "Well, in theory, pure witches aren't allowed to step into this place. The witches who inject magic power into the sigil are all selected from the converts. Once they see those illusions, they will soon be used in the conversion ceremony of the God's punishment army. Isabella nodded. From the moment Zero came here, she became one of the candidates for the Pope. What a disgusting method, Nightingale said angrily. Roland didn't know whether she was talking about the conversion ceremony or Zero. Isabella tactfully closed her mouth. When they walked to the end of the hall, a full-body portrait that occupied the entire wall appeared in front of them. Different from the dim yellow passage, the frame of the portrait was surrounded by stones of lighting, and the soft light vividly displayed every detail of the portrait. Although Roland had heard Agatha and the others mention the appearance of the Queen of Witches many times, when he really saw the portrait, an indescribable feeling rose in his heart. Alice held her sword with both hands and looked straight ahead, as if she was gazing at the unknown future, but also as if she was looking at him. No words could describe her appearance. Softness and firmness, ice and fire seemed to be a perfect combination on her, and it was hard to forget her after seeing her once. If only her facial features were outstanding, it wouldn't have surprised him so much. From Alice, the aura of a leader was overwhelming, almost tangible, as if she was born to be favored by God, and as long as he followed her, he would be able to usher in an inevitable victory. What a beautiful woman, Anna sighed. Fortunately, she's not here anymore. Hey, what do you mean by the second half? Roland gently patted her head. Even if Alice was still alive, would he be so attracted to her? However, looking at Nightingale beside him, he decided not to say this out loud. He definitely had a clear conscience, but what if that fellow came up with some sort of untruthful, or half-truth, judgment? That would be impossible to explain. After admiring the face of the Queen of Starfall City, they walked into the illusory space hidden behind the giant portrait. There are a total of 9 sigil of magic stones here, and I haven't seen all of them. It seems that some of them were passed down from ancient times. Isabella pressed her hand on the magic stones. If you want to see, I'll activate each of them. Then let's start. Roland nodded. Chapter 899. In the darkness, he felt 2 hands grabbing him at the same time. At the same time, Nightingale's vigilant voice rang out. What's going on? The illusion generated by this sigil acts directly on the eyes, Agatha explained. It looks like everyone has disappeared, but in fact, it doesn't affect reality. We're still standing in the same place. If you don't want to see it, just step back and get out of the area of effect of the sigil, Isabella added. Sure enough, after a while, the darkness gradually faded, revealing a transparent glass dome, a marble floor, and a spacious conference table. Then came the witches in the Union Standard robes. The Queen of Starfall City, with her long red hair, was among them. Although more than 400 years had passed, everyone looked so vivid. Even the teacups on the table were steaming. It was as if the frozen moment in history was happening again. If such a thing had existed in his previous life, those historians who stared at the soil and turned it over to look for 1 or 2 fragments of words would have been moved to tears. Seeing that there was no danger, one of her hands let go of Roland, but the other hand did not let go. Instead, it slid down and clasped his fingers tightly. Roland immediately knew who it was. He raised the corner of his mouth, squeezed the soft hand in his hand, and looked at the center of the illusion. Isabella's activation sequence was obviously close first and then far. The location shown in the illusion changed from the escape route to Tequila, and then from Tequila to Starfall City. Apart from Alice, who was getting younger and younger, the witches who appeared on the battlefield had changed batch after batch. It was difficult to see even a few familiar faces. There was no doubt that the Union had suffered a great loss in this long and cruel war. Only a few of the higher-ups were able to survive until the day they had to flee. This was also the flaw of the Witch Empire's system. The more powerful the witches were, the higher the status. It sounded like there was no problem, but when the war broke out, the higher-ups had to go to the battlefield in person, instead of commanding the overall situation from the rear. Roland had heard from Agatha that Alice had advanced to a transcendent in an extremely dangerous battle, and she had experienced such battles many times during her reign. In other words, if they were not careful, the history of the Union, or even the entire human race would have to be rewritten. Even the leader of the 3 seats was like this, let alone the other higher-ups. But in reality, this was very disadvantageous to the training of leaders. A recruit only needed to survive 1 or 2 battles and lick a few mouthfuls of blood to transform into a veteran, but a general needed several battles and the deaths of thousands of people to truly mature. Leading the charge was indeed the best way to boost morale, but it was a choice that should only be considered when there was no other choice. If everything went smoothly, even if there was no need to boost the morale of the soldiers, they would still fight with high fighting spirit. Generals and soldiers were not equal in value. In the face of an all-out war that required people to be expendable, such a method was not advisable. Roland did not expect to find any earth-shattering secrets from the sigils. The past popes should have repeatedly read the content of these illusions. If there were really records about the origin of the divine will or the essence of the relics of the gods, the Church would not have fallen to such a state. Apart from satisfying his curiosity, the rest of the purpose of his trip was to learn from history and see if he could gain some experience. The actual situation was similar to what he had imagined. Most of the scenes recorded in the images were scenes of important meetings, ceremonies, and war mobilization. Only at such times was it worthwhile to use the sigils of magic stones. According to Agatha, sigils that could last for a long time were very valuable. The illusion soon reached the last one. Alice and the other 2 witches had all disappeared from the image. Instead, they were replaced by a group of elderly witches dressed in a variety of costumes, and the image was no longer as clear as before. Agatha let out a soft sound of surprise. These people are the early founders of the Union? Phyllis continued. Who are they? Roland raised his eyebrows. The extraordinary witches who survived the first battle of divine will were the predecessors of the Union. Look at the documents on the table. Is this seen? Phyllis said in surprise. It should be. Agatha's voice was also full of joy. I didn't expect that I could see the famous 3 Kings' Oath with my own eyes. Roland was suddenly confused. He also tried to look at the documents carefully, but found that they were all written with magic power. Only witches could read them. Who can explain what this oath is for? Let me do it. Agatha's voice came from the front. It can be regarded as a symbolic event of the Union's transformation from a loose organization to a unified one. Almost every awakened witch has to learn about it. After the end of the first battle of divine will, the Union was declared to be under the control of witches. However, at that time, there were still many internal voices, whether it was the way to govern the ordinary people or the strategy to fight against the demons. Such debates lasted for many years until 3 forces stood out and became more and more powerful. In the end, they overwhelmed the other lords and city-states and established the organization structure of the 3 seats, which was proposed by many people and ruled by the 3 seats. They are Starfall City, Tequila, and Arietta. Nightingale asked. Yes. Due to the special nature of these 3 holy cities, their lords were often called queens. Agatha replied, for example, Alice, Queen of Starfall City, Natalia, Queen of Sunchester, and Eleanor, Queen of Moonlight, were the last 3 seats of the Union. I see, Roland thought. For the witches of that era, the 3 Kings' Oath was probably as important as the founding of a country. It meant that the Union had changed from a pan-alliance organization to a political entity. No wonder Agatha and Phyllis were so excited. Historically speaking, the Second Battle of Divine Will was also of great significance. Although the Union still failed in the end, without the 3 chiefs system, the Second Battle of Divine Will would have been defeated even faster, and there would not have been so many witches who had taken, fighting against the demons and recovering tequila, as their lifelong beliefs. However, these things were not so attractive to him. Distracted, Roland shifted his attention to the details in the projection, such as the witches' costumes, the cups, pens, paper, and the furnishings in the hall. Since it was hundreds of years after Alice's era, the furnishings were obviously much shabbier. Obviously, after the defeat of the First Battle of Divine Will, the witches' territories were still in a state of waiting to be rebuilt. On the wall of the conference hall, he saw more than 10 portraits, 2 of which were men, probably outstanding heroes during the war. It was obvious that at that time, the Union had not completely regarded ordinary people as inferior people. Even in such an important conference, he could still see the figures of their male compatriots. Just as Roland was about to ask Agatha if she knew the names of these people, he suddenly felt the blood in his body freeze. An indescribable chill rose from the soles of his feet and instantly ran through his spine. Because of the intense fear, a series of goosebumps appeared on his arms, and his fingertips trembled slightly. "What's wrong?" Anna immediately noticed that something was wrong with him. That painting." Roland swallowed his saliva and said with difficulty. "Painting? The person in the painting. I've seen it before." It took him a long time to finish this sentence. Although the clarity of the illusion was not as good as before, he could still distinguish the outline of the person in the second-to-last painting. It was a middle-aged woman with an ordinary appearance. Her long black hair was coiled on top of her head, and one eye was covered with an eye patch. She was sitting on a high-backed chair with her hands crossed. Chapter 900. It had just rained heavily in the jungle, diluting the bloody smell of the corpses. If it was an ordinary hunter, it was likely that he would have missed his target. But for Lorger, the smell mixed in the air after the rain was enough to tell her a lot of information. For example, there was more than one animal corpse. Some had a pure bloody smell, while others had a hint of decay, which proved that many animals had died in the same place. Small prey such as rabbits, rats, and foxes could hardly spread their smell to such a far place. Even if they could, it should not be so clear. In other words, the dead animals were basically large, at least not smaller than cows and horses. To be able to drag these big guys to a place, they must have the corresponding strength. The behavior of gathering many corpses was mostly the habit of carnivores to store food. Such places were often the nests of large predators. Of course, the most important point was that Lorger caught an indescribable turbid smell in the fishy smell, which was the unique smell of mixed demonic beast blood. If she did not change into her wolf form, she would only be able to smell the pungent stench. Only after using her ability, she could detect the subtle difference hidden in it. That was the smell of magic. Not every mixed demonic beast could absorb magic, but those with magic in their blood must be mixed demonic beasts, and their strength was also far greater than that of ordinary demonic beasts. This was also one of the improvements she had made after several months of hunting in the jungle. If she could have mastered this skill before the holy duel, the four-winged eagle that launched a surprise attack from the air would not have been able to catch her clothes. Although the climate, environment, and prey in the barbarian wasteland were far different from those in the desert, the hunting skills were the same. In summary, there were only 3 points: caution, meticulousness, and patience. Lorger's target was a burly bear hybrid. When it stood up, it was as tall as 3 people, and at first glance, it looked like a moving iron tower. She did not know which demonic beast it had mixed with, but its skin was like armor, and even sharp wolf teeth could not kill it. What was even more frightening was its head. The bear species actually had 4 eyes, 2 of which were at the back of its head. This made her most adept at attacking from behind, bleeding and cutting throats, lose its usual effectiveness. 5 days ago, Lorger had fought with the bear. After a fierce battle, she had lost 2 of her claws, while the bear had lost half of its front paw. Its stomach was also covered in bloody wounds. It could be said that this was the most troublesome enemy she had encountered since entering the barbarian land. Its strength was roughly equivalent to that of the divine beast of the desert. If she hadn't gone through sufficient training and encountered this fellow from the very beginning, she would have been the one running away. But this was a hunt, not a fair duel. She had the herbs cultivated by Leaf, the purifying water made by Lily, and the powerful recovery ability after the transformation. She did not have to worry about ordinary injuries. These days, apart from healing her wounds, she spent the rest of her time searching for bear breeds. As the smell grew stronger, Lorger knew that the outcome of the battle would soon be revealed. She gently stepped over a puddle of water. Her pads sank into the moist soil, making almost no sound. She chose to cut into the downwind so that it would be difficult for the bear to detect her presence through the smell. Little by little, she approached the source of the smell. She pricked up her ears and used the sound to locate the direction of the target. At the same time, she raised her claws and slowly pushed away the vines in front of her. The body of a bear hybrid suddenly appeared in her line of sight. The other party had no idea of her arrival. It was engrossed in biting a fat stag. Its cheeks were covered with blood, and its broken limbs were exposed. It looked particularly terrifying. If it were an ordinary animal, it would have been listlessly curled up in a hidden place after suffering such a serious injury. It would not act rashly before it recovered. But it did not seem to care about those wounds, as if filling its stomach was more important than anything else. The wolf girl tightened her hind legs and slightly bent down. This time, she planned to destroy the 4 eyes of the demonic beast first so that it would have no chance to escape. Just when she was ready to attack, another series of footsteps suddenly came from the depths of the forest. This made Lorgar a little stunned for a moment. Why would there be such rhythmic footsteps in the depths of the barbarian land? The footsteps were very heavy and had no intention of hiding. The alternating footsteps were unique to humans, and there was more than one. Could it be that the hunters of Neverwinter had lost their way? No. She quickly denied this speculation. This place was more than 10 days away from the border of Greycastle. Considering the dense forest and weeds, it would be even slower to travel on land. Not to mention that after crossing the prairie, there were ferocious beasts, snakes, and insects everywhere. As for the area around the Tequila ruins, it was a place where demonic hybrid beasts roamed. Even if they had lost their way, it was impossible for them to come here alive. Lorgar suddenly thought of an answer. It was a seemingly reasonable and long-awaited answer. At that moment, she felt the hair all over her body stand up and her heart seemed to be pounding. Although she was highly nervous, her body instantly entered the best fighting state. The bear also noticed this unusual sound. It dropped half of the deer leg, turned over, and climbed up. It let out a hoarse, low roar in the direction of the footsteps. The bushes shook, and the intertwined branches were pushed away. 2 ferocious monsters came out of the shadows. They had dark brown skin, muscular arms, a fully enclosed beast bone helmet, and a sharp bone spear. They were exactly the same as what Lightning had described. They were demons. She had waited for so long. The moment the demons showed up, the demonic hybrid beast launched an attack. It raised its intact forepaw and jumped towards the uninvited guests who had disturbed its meal. Its speed was so fast that it could not have been done by such a burly body. In addition to the strength of the bear, this attack also carried the impact of its whole body. The effect was no less than the high-altitude dive of a 4-winged eagle. If it were Princess Roland, her first reaction would have been to dodge. After all, if she was not an extraordinary, even if she could block this attack, she would have to pay a heavy price. But the enemy did not retreat. One of the demon's arms quickly swelled up and directly met the demonic beast's giant palm. With a muffled sound, the 2 monsters collided without any buffer. The result was a tie. Whether it was the bear or the demon, they could not take another step forward. But as a single body, the demon was half a head shorter than the opponent, so a stalemate was obviously disadvantageous. However, there was more than one demon at the scene. Another mad demon had taken down the bone spear and aimed it at the demonic hybrid beast. The battle was about to end, and there was not much time left for Lorgar to think. Should she leave or stay? Although the tube on the back is the weakness of the demons, they are not easy to deal with. Lightning's warning suddenly sounded in her mind. If you really encounter an enemy, it is best to retreat immediately and inform His Majesty. Her reason also told her that she should retreat temporarily, but her fighting instinct was boiling in her chest. No, this was not a problem that needed to be considered. Of course, there was danger, but she came here for this, didn't she? And according to the intelligence, after the mad demon's arm swelled up, there would be a period of obvious fatigue. She might be able to gain an advantage in a 1-on-2 fight. Whoosh, With a sound, the demon threw the bone spear in its hand. Chapter 901. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. The bone spear streaked across the air and pierced through the bear's chest. It was so fast that it could not be seen by the naked eye. Lorgar was not sure that she could dodge the spear if it was thrown within the visual range. The demon had obviously noticed the giant wolf that suddenly rushed out of the grass, but it was impossible for it to parry or dodge the attack. Its right hand was still entangled with the bear. The only thing it could do, or subconsciously, was to raise its other hand in front of its head. This action saved its throat, but it sent its entire left arm to Princess Lorgar's mouth. Without hesitation, she bit the arm, and a strong smell of blood immediately poured into her mouth. Compared with the bear, which had rough skin and thick flesh, the mad demon's limbs were almost the same as those of a human's, maybe a little harder, but in front of the 3-inch wolf's teeth, its muscles were as soft as a piece of cloth. This touch greatly boosted Lorgar's confidence. The two passed each other. She was unharmed, while one of the enemies had already lost the ability to fight. This was undoubtedly an extremely successful surprise attack. When the hybrid demonic beast fell, the heavily injured mad demon staggered back a few steps and roared at her angrily. However, without its left arm and its right arm completely atrophied, it was difficult for it to maintain its balance, which greatly reduced its deterrence. Lorgar was surprised by the reaction of the other demon. He quickly took out a piece of bull horn and put it in his mouth. Woo! The deep sound of the horn broke the silence of the forest and startled a flock of birds. What does it mean? Are there other demons nearby? But she had clearly checked the situation in the film area. Apart from the beehives and bird nests that lightning had warned her to mark, there was nothing else worth paying attention to. Lorgar decided not to think too much about it. She had to kill the demon that still had one arm first. Even if they had reinforcements, they would only see the corpses of their companions by the time they arrived. She dashed forward and in the blink of an eye, she was already in front of the demon who was blowing the horn. The latter dropped the horn, pulled out the stone axe hanging at his waist, and chopped at the wolf girl. If it had been half a year ago, Lorgar would have chosen to avoid the sharp edge, retreat, and then look for opportunities. However, after experiencing the battle with the extraordinary witches, the 4-winged eagle, and many hybrid demonic beasts, her skills had made great progress. Tilting her body, Third Princess exerted strength on one side of her limbs and leaped to the side at an almost strange angle. Her body almost flew out horizontally. The axe naturally missed its target. However, this was not a simple dodge. When the demon's attention was completely focused on her mouth and claws, the real attack came quietly. Lorgar curled her huge tail into a hook shape and swept it directly at the back of the demon's head. This attack fully utilized the momentum of her body, like an invisible uppercut. Bang! Along with a muffled sound, the unexpected demon was sent flying and crashed heavily into a tree. The stone axe also flew to one side. Roar! Just as Lorgar was about to take advantage of the situation to pursue the enemy and give the enemy a fatal claw, she suddenly heard a shrill roar behind her. She subconsciously felt that something was wrong. She turned around and swept her claws, which happened to collide with the broken arm mad demon. This palm was completely solid. She could even feel the other party's ribs breaking, and his whole chest deflating a bit. The sharp claws penetrated the leather and directly pierced into the demon's body. This was a completely suicidal attack, as if the other party deliberately used his body to receive her giant palm. Why? As soon as this thought flashed through her mind, Lorgar knew the answer. The withered right arm of the broken arm mad demon swelled again. Didn't they say that it would take more than half a quarter of an hour to recover? Lorgar was shocked and wanted to get rid of the opponent, but her claws were tightly held by the enemy as if caught in an iron clamp. This posture, could it be? She quickly looked at the other demon who had been hit by the tail, and her heart suddenly sank to the bottom. Sure enough, the latter's arm also swelled, and there were even bloodstains on the dry skin. Wait! She suddenly remembered what Lightning had said. In the hot air balloon battle in the Great Snow Mountain of the Western region, the Mad Demon did show the ability to throw the spear twice in a short time, but the power of the second shot would be greatly reduced, and the arm with the magic stone embedded in it would be completely destroyed. It could be said that it was a kind of self-abandoning fighting style, and there was nothing to be afraid of at all. It would be strange. That idiot, she was really the cause of her death. Although this kind of desperate fight had endless consequences, it could cause great trouble to the opponent at the critical moment of life and death. There was a saying among the Sand Nation, "Don't approach the loser," which was the same principle. He no longer cared about what happened behind him, and the last blow must be extremely fierce. The demon that grabbed her arm could not completely imprison her movements. Only an extraordinary could do this, but Lorgar knew that the only purpose of the other party was to make her move slower. Whether she turned around to escape or wait for an opportunity to dodge, she would not survive the next fatal blow. In a few breaths, the Mad Demon's arm had swelled to its limit, and blue blood splashed from the cracked skin, as if it would explode at any time. It took the last bone spear and aimed it at the wolf girl. She could only take a gamble. Lorgar's eyes widened, and she stared at the enemy's every move. For a moment, the world around her became silent, and she could only hear the rhythm of her own heartbeat. The moment the Mad Demon made its move, she cut off the surging magic power in her body. The wolf quickly shrank, and a large gap suddenly appeared in the originally firm as a handcuff. Not only that, but the huge monster that was almost always hit by the spear thrower suddenly changed its shape. The bone spear that flew straight towards the head of the desert wolf pierced through the demon with the broken arm behind her like lightning. At this time, Norgar had returned to her human form. She won the gamble. The spear thrower obviously did not expect this. It covered its completely withered arm and froze in place until the third princess walked in front of it. It opened its mouth and said 2 words. Ta-ka. Then Lorgar turned one of her hands into a wolf's claws and crushed its helmet. The red mist dissipated, and the demon collapsed to the ground, breathless. At this time, Lorgar let out a sigh of relief. She won. And it was 1 against 2. It seemed that the demons were only so-so. Although the power of their strengthened arm was amazing, there was no skill to speak of in the fight. They basically fought by instinct, which could be said to be a waste of their excellent physique and talent. On the path of a warrior, the demons did not go far. She believed that as long as they fought a few more times, this kind of hunting would become easier. The vast barbarian land under her feet would become the best place for her to hone her skills. Then, Lorgar heard a faint tremor, as if something was continuously pressing down on the ground, like the sea swallowing the beach, heavy and vigorous. Russell, how was this possible? She frowned slightly and pricked up her ears toward the source of the sound. This was the inland of Greycastle, not the southernmost region near the sea, so it should be impossible to hear the sound of waves. Was it a flash flood? But there were no obvious mountains here, so how could there be a flood? Lorgar looked around, found the highest tree, and climbed up. The tremor came from the direction of the Tequila ruins. The next moment, the wolf girl was stunned at the end of the tree trunk. She saw densely packed figures of demons appearing at the border between heaven and earth, slowly moving forward like a black tide. More than 100 devil beasts circled above the tide, moving back and forth in a neat formation. What was even more unbelievable was that there were a few unimaginably huge monsters among the group of devils, and they were walking toward the ruins step by step. They were as high as a 10-story building, and their 4 twisted legs could almost cross the city wall in one step. Anyone standing in front of them would look small and powerless. It was difficult to even think of resisting, let alone to initiate an attack. She raised her head to look at the sky. After the rain, the sky looked especially blue. Occasionally, a light breeze would blow by, accompanied by the white clouds. Everything was as usual, quiet and peaceful. Lorgar did not see the bloody moon, which Lightning said symbolized the end of the world, nor did she see the gloomy and depressing red mist. Chapter 902. I can see the port. Molly's shout immediately attracted the attention of all the witches on the ship. Where? Where? Hey, are we finally there? We've been drifting for almost a month and a half. That silver-white spot of light is another sailboat, isn't it? Isn't it said that only the charming beauty travels this route? Fishing boat, it's a fishing boat. Everyone leaned over the side of the ship and stood on tiptoe to look in the direction Molly was pointing at. Seeing the lively scene in front of him, the old Captain Jack shook his head with a smile and said to Camilla Derry, who had a grave expression on her face, "You don't look very happy. This is a rare good day." "Why is it good?" Camilla replied somewhat absent-mindedly. "It's good to go home." Jack shook his pipe and said, "Isn't it worth celebrating to be able to return to your homeland after so many years? Don't think that I can't see that you don't regard Sleeping Island as your home. Of course, I don't mean that you hate staying in the fjords, but there's a difference between a refuge and a home." Camilla fell silent. She did not know whether what Jack said was true or not. She only knew that after Her Highness Tilly's letter had been sent back, the number of witches willing to go to the western region of Grey Castle had increased a lot, gradually climbing from the initial 50% to about 80%. If the first batch of witches could be properly settled, she really could not tell how many of them would be willing to stay on Sleeping Island in the end. That was supposed to be their home, there was no hostile secular environment, and there was no frightening church. The living conditions would indeed be much worse at the beginning, and the customs and habits would be very different from those of the kingdoms on land. But as long as they persisted for 10 years or so, Sleeping Island would definitely become better and better. It would not even take a generation for the newly awakened witches to regard the island as their true homeland. After a long time, she said in a low voice, "If only it was as you said." "Oh," Jack said, stroking his beard. "You don't believe in the king? You know?" Camilla looked up. "Ha, you have 'I'm worried' written all over your face," the old captain laughed. "Do you remember what it was like when you first set sail on a ship 3 years ago?" 3 years ago, the chief butler pondered for a moment. That was the time when Her Highness Tilly secretly contacted the witches to evacuate from Grey Castle. As one of the few captains who had no prejudice against witches, Jack and his charming beauty risked being reported and put on trial to secretly pick up a large number of witches from the port city. Because of this, Sleeping Island had formed a deep friendship with the one-eyed captain. "Am I in a sorry state?" she asked hesitantly. "Embarrassed?" Jack snorted. "It's not that simple. At that time, all of you were covered in dirt and your eyes were dull and lifeless. It wouldn't be wrong to say that you were the living dead. Look at the present, don't you feel completely different? Therefore, the past was the past, and the present was the present. It was always right to look forward. Some of them have been to Neverwinter many times. If it was a terrible place, how could they laugh so easily? But the nobles are fickle, including you." The old captain interrupted her. "If I remember correctly, you're also a noble, aren't you? The day you left Grey Castle, you were dressed more exquisitely than most of the people who boarded the ship. Ordinary civilians couldn't afford to wear clothes made of silk. Think about it, if I hated the nobles as much as you do, what would have happened?" Camilla opened her mouth, but could not answer. Jack slowly exhaled a mouthful of white smoke. "I don't think a person can be judged by his identity alone. Apart from the 3 gods, who can decide their own origin? The same goes for witches. Don't you think that simply hating witches because of their identity is not fundamentally different from your prejudice?" The chief butler of Sleeping Island suddenly felt his heart tremble. "You may say that it's because you're a noble that you know what they are like. But don't forget that as long as one person isn't like them, your prejudice will cause injustice and harm to him." The old captain paused. "I'm sorry, child, perhaps I shouldn't say these words, but I don't want you to be blinded by your past experience, not only on this matter. People always have to look forward." No one will say this except him, Camilla thought. Her Highness Tilly must have understood this long ago, so she took the initiative to go to Neverwinter. But she would not say this directly, especially when she said, "There's no essential difference between the two," which almost sounded like a reproach. It was not because they were estranged, but because they were too close, and even the respect His Highness had for her prevented her from further admonishing him. In the whole of Sleeping Island, perhaps only the old captain would call her child. Camilla heaved a long sigh. "Maybe you're right." "Am I?" Jack chuckled. "As you get older, you always encounter similar things. If you don't have an optimistic heart, you won't be able to persist on the sea for so long. But the following days won't be so good." "Why?" "You've all returned to the mainland kingdom. Who else wants to take the charming beauty? I heard from those big chambers of commerce that a new kind of ship without sails will soon replace the existing ships and become the main merchant ships of the fjords. Whether it's carrying capacity or speed, it'll be far better than my old partners. By then, I'm afraid no one will want to use her to transport goods. Maybe I can talk to Her Highness Tilly." "Talk about what?" "Support me for the rest of my life?" The old captain waved his pipe. "That's too early. I can still run. In fact, I plan to send you all to Grey Castle, and then go to Lord Thunder's expedition to try my luck." "Expedition?" Camilla said in surprise. "Yes. After crossing the Shadow Islands, we'll go to the untrodden sea. As long as we find something new, not to mention retirement money, we can even open a new business group." One-eyed Jack turned around and looked at the sea in high spirits. "Don't be fooled by my old age and slow legs. When it comes to judging the direction of the wind, there are few captains in the entire fjords who are more competent than me." "Really?" Camilla found that she seemed to know this ordinary-looking old man from the fjords for the first time. His expression at this moment was simply the best portrayal of looking forward. "Chief, we're almost at the shore." The lookout on the mast shouted. "Do you need me to teach you what to do next?" Jack looked up and stared at him. "Retract the sails and slow down." Camilla looked at the port area and found that there were all kinds of red banners hanging around the pier, all of which read, "Welcome to Neverwinter." Among the people welcoming them, there were not only witches but also many ordinary people. She even saw a procession of 11 or 12-year-old children, holding a bunch of flowers in their hands, waiting for their arrival by the pier. Chapter 903. Is it really okay to do this? Wendy pointed at the ordinary people on the dock and said in a low voice, "I mean, if the witches of Sleeping Island knew that they paid people to welcome the witches instead of welcoming them with sincerity, I'm afraid they wouldn't feel comfortable, would they? Then can you find a group of residents who are willing to welcome the witches?" Scroll replied in a low voice as well. "No." Wendy hesitated for a moment and finally shook her head. In fact, it was difficult to find one or two people, let alone a group. It was true that under the rule of Roland, the people of Neverwinter had greatly accepted the witches, and some witches even received special attention and love. However, the Sleeping Island immigrants were no different from strangers to them. It was almost impossible for the subjects to put down their work and take the initiative to welcome a group of people they had never met before. At present, the only people who could make the people of the Western region do this, except for His Majesty, were the relatives of the First Army. So there's no problem at all with His Majesty's arrangement. Scroll shrugged. The big red flowers, the welcome banners, the family welcome team, these expenses are all included in the activity budget in advance. If you don't use them, won't other departments take them? According to His Majesty's original plan, the scale will be much larger than this. Well, you're right. Wendy wiped the non-existent sweat on her forehead. Since Her Highness Tilly told him that the witches of Sleeping Island were about to set off, His Majesty had been excited for many days. In addition to what Scroll had said, he had listed out the welcome team of honor, the song and dance troupe, the fireworks show, which sounded awesome. If Hill Fox had not informed him that the expedition plan had been carried out ahead of schedule, the welcome ceremony hosted by His Majesty would have been spectacular. So, the best way to recruit them is to use money, Scroll said with a smile. They won't even get a chance to come to ordinary people. Those who can come are all from excellent families with good records in City Hall. You can rest assured. She paused for a moment and then said, the witches are coming. Go and meet them, my Minister of the Union. Scroll. Vendi chided him, then nodded to Her Highness Tilly and walked towards the guests who had come from afar. Hello. When the two groups met, she opened her arms and said in the softest voice, I'm Vendi, the head of the Witch Union. Welcome to Neverwinter. According to the agreement, the witches of Sleeping Island were only considered as subjects of the Western region and were not under the management of the Alliance. Therefore, Vendi planned to take them to the residential area first and do a simple headcount so that the City Hall could allocate food. As for the tour arrangements and work plans, she planned to discuss it with Lady Tilly after everyone settled down. The area specifically built for Sleeping Island had been completed 2 months ago. It was named after the Bounty Guild and was called Sleeping Spell. It was located right next to the Miracle Building. Seeing this magnificent building, that had risen from the ground and had already been built to 6 floors, a series of exclamations broke out among the witches. In particular, the unique smooth feeling of the concrete building's surface made it easy for people to feel that it was extraordinary. Are those really rocks? Why do they look so flat? We won't live here, will we? Don't even think about it. It's obviously the Lord's castle. If we can live on the top floor, the scenery must be very beautiful. Seeing that everyone was full of curiosity, Vendi took the opportunity to introduce the building. Now this building is only half built. When it's completely finished, it will eventually reach 55 meters, that is, more than 16 meters high and 5 feet high. But His Majesty doesn't live here. Although his castle only has 3 floors, it's located in the center of Neverwinter. So high. Aren't you afraid that it will collapse? Someone asked in surprise. His Majesty invented a special building material that can turn flowing mucus into solid stones. This is just an experiment. He once said that even a house as high as a mountain can be built with this material. Vendi smiled. Of course, to achieve this, we also need the witches' help. In fact, this building was built by witches and many workers. Am I right, Lotus? Hey, did you really make this? But isn't your ability to raise and lower the ground? The witches all looked at Lotus in the line. Lotus touched her head embarrassedly. I just helped the workers build the slope. When they need to build a new floor, I can raise the surrounding land and attach it to the side of the building to make it convenient for them to do their work. Then, will there be people who show hatred or disgust because you're a witch? Someone asked the key question. Not yet. I think they already treat me as an ordinary person. Lotus waved her hand. Sometimes, if I go there early, the workers will even share pancakes with me. This was exactly what Wendy wanted. Perhaps many of you are still vigilant when you come here. That's normal. After all, Neverwinter is a strange city to you, and the witches' sufferings on this continent over the past 100 years can be described as unbearable. But I can guarantee that all of you will feel at home here, just like the name His Majesty gave to this city. Even if you don't join the Witch Union, as long as you encounter any difficulties in life, no matter how big or small, you can come to me. Well done. Scroll secretly gave her a thumbs up. However, Vendi did not expect that the first trouble would arise when arranging for the witches to register their names, biographies, and abilities. Why do we have to record this? After handing out the forms, a red-haired witch protested. Didn't you say that you wouldn't force us to stay? I'm only going to stay here for 2 days. Let's forget about this. Me too. Her Highness Tilly said that Neverwinter doesn't restrict witches from staying. I want to go back to the eastern region. Since the church is gone, there's no need to leak this information. If someone with bad intentions sees it, it'll be too disadvantageous for us. There were actually quite a few witches in the crowd who objected to the idea. I knew it, it's Azima again. Ashes frowned. Azima? Vendi was startled. A group of witches from the eastern region. Sorry, they don't really agree with my leadership, Tilly explained in a low voice. But compared to the Blood Fang Association, they're not bad in nature. Then she looked at the red-haired witch. I can understand that you want to go back and have a look, but now is not a good time. Although the church has been destroyed, most of the people are still hostile to witches, not to mention the nobles. Especially in the eastern region, before Roland officially reclaims it, the situation of witches hasn't changed significantly. How would you know if you haven't been there? Azima persisted. Or are you just helping your brother? Watch your attitude, Ashes said in a cold voice. What? Do you want to fight here? Like what you did to Heidi and Skyflare? Vendi bit her lip. She did not expect things to become so tricky, but she could not think of a way to appease both sides. At this moment, Scroll stepped forward. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.